Okay, if we could take our seats, I'll note that it's June 8th, 2012. This is the FORA Reuse Authority, and I will call the meeting to order. And if we could have a roll call, we'll know if we're here or not.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Councilmember Beach. City of Delray Oaks, Mayor Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Brown.
Here.
City of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge.
Here.
Monterey County Chair Potter.
Yeah.
Monterey County Supervisor Calcagno. Monterey County Supervisor Parker.
Here.
City of Pacific Grove, Mayor Pro Tem Camp. City of Salinas, Mayor Donahue. City of Sand City, Mayor Pendergrass.
Here.
City of Seaside, Mayor Bachhoffner. City of Seaside, Councilmember Oglesby.
Here.
17th Congressional District, Alec Arago.
Here.
15th State Senate District, Hans Poschman.
Here.
27th State Assembly District, Assemblymember Monning.
Here.
University of California, Graham Bice.
Here.
California State University, Justin Wellner.
Here.
Monterey Peninsula College, Vicky Nakamura. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, Dr. Shepard. Monterey Salinas Transit, Hunter Harvath. Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Debbie Hale.
Here.
United States Army, Colonel Clark. Fort Ord BRAC Office, Bill Collins. Marina Coast Water District, Howard Gustafson. Chair Potter, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Assemblyman Monning, would you be good enough to lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Bill. Okay, under acknowledgments, do we have any acknowledgments?
Yes, simply that members of the Bureau of Land Management have joined us today, and they have a specific acknowledgement and a note that they'd like to do right at the front end of the meeting. Right now. Mr. Eric?
I didn't know whether we were going to do this now or during the comment period, but what she's going to be bringing in, Tammy Jekyll is our interpretive park ranger at Fort Ord, and she happens to be, I always jokingly refer to her as our award-winning park ranger because she is nationally renowned in BLM, and she is the best interpretive park ranger in all of BLM, so we're fortunate to have her on the team.
Here.
But what she's going to be bringing in today is an old, obsolete Fort Ord public land sign, and the reason it's obsolete is because our good president decided to designate for us the Fort Ord National Monument, and so signs like this all have to be replaced, and we were hoping that we could have a place to put this sign over in your public room, Michael, because there's a variety of reasons we picked this area. And one reason that we picked this area is that many people may not know this, but the Fort Ord Reuse Authority body, the board, was the very first board of elected officials that supported designation of the national monument. So I'm going to ask all the board members to raise your hand, if you could do that right now. And just to kind of go around, who was on the board in 2011? So keep your hands up if you were on the board in 2011. Who was on the board in 2010? Who was on the board in 2009? Who was on the board in 2008? Okay, I think 2008 is a pretty important time because in November of 2008, this guy right here presented to the board the idea of designating the Fort Ord Public Lands as a national monument. And every board since that time has supported that, and there's been multiple visits by the board and the legislative committee of FORA back to D.C., talking to everybody they could potentially talk to support that designation. Congressman Farr has been obviously instrumental in it all. And so we thought no better place to put this sign is in the FORA visitor area. And we had a wonderful ceremony last month, I guess it was on May 19th, and we had some wonderful speakers there. We had our Secretary of Interior Salazar, Assistant Secretary Hayes, Congressman Farr spoke and very eloquently. We had from the White House Nancy Sutley of the CEQ, and we had our National Director Bob Abbey. And of all of those people, my kids were at that dedication ceremony. There's really only one person my kids remembered, and it was this very dangerous-looking man wearing a green beret that led a group hoo-ah at the end. Okay, and so I wish he was. So I wish he was here today because I wanted to let him know that we thank him for his service, and we are going to do our best to honor him, those under his charge, and all of the soldiers and the memories of the soldiers that have ever passed through Fort Ord with their management. So thank you, and we hope that this will have a place to hang out here at the FORA board or at the FORA admin area.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just add a note, if I can, from the other side of the this is going to wind up either in the Community Information Center or in the visitor entryway, depending on our landlord MCWD's approval. So you'll have to ask them about that later.
Well, thank you so much. It is truly a great memento, and it has what I would consider to be acceptable graffiti on it, which is well wishes and thank you from a variety of members of the public. So thanks so much for taking the time. Vanna, are you doing a walk by here? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Do a workout is what they're doing.
All sorts of members of the public. Yeah, that one's one of them.
That's right. I wonder if they did already.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
know I
idea,
didn't.
Bill. Actually, why don't we leave it here for signatures on the way out by board members?
Is there a pen?
Well, let's make sure we can still see the legislators. Yeah, yeah. I'm only so tall, you know. It'll be the talking sign.
Oh, that is great.
Okay.
I'm totally taking a picture.
I would like to acknowledge and my appreciation also for those that have taken time to come in and sort of give us a legislative update on what's going on both federally and statewide. Alec, you are standing in for the congressman, so if you would like to lead off today, and we'll offer a brief opportunity for people to ask some questions if needs be.
I'd actually like to defer to Assemblyman Monning. He's actually the
Fine.
elected official among us, so I will, as a staff member, defer to Mr. Monning and then
Most
follow on.
appropriate.
Great. Well, first I want to thank Alec and Congressman Farr's office, and to play off of that presentation, to acknowledge the tremendous work of Congressman Farr and the FORA board and everybody that's had a hand in the designation of the national monument. It's a huge step forward and consistent with, I think, the vision shared by everyone in this room for recognizing not only the historic importance of Fort Ord to our country and our the soldiers who served here and were trained here, but its ongoing role as a national resource. So I know Alec will be sharing more on that on behalf of Congressman Farr, but I welcomed the opportunity to be present there and see the convergence of so many from our community, from veterans to bike riders to hikers to electeds. It was a wonderful gathering. What I thought I would do is give some brief updates specifically on two pieces of state legislation that directly affect FORA and Fort Ord reuse, and then a very brief, hopefully not too depressing report on our state budget challenges, and would be glad to respond to any questions folks might have. But again, I appreciate this opportunity that you build into the FORA agenda for periodic legislative updates. Many of you have been following the legislation AB 1614, seeking an extension of the established sunset date for FORA, and that has cleared the assembly floor. It is set for hearing this coming Wednesday, June 13th at 9:30 a.m. in the Senate Committee on Governance and Finance. That's basically the committee equivalent to local government on the assembly side. So there will be testimony taken at that hearing. We're waiting to see the committee analysis. It did clear the assembly with bipartisan support, and as part of that process, we've continued to convene meetings here with stakeholders. I want to thank Mr. Hulamard and his staff for helping to host meetings that I asked that we convene start over a year ago, where we've been meeting with various stakeholders and identifying and outlining ongoing concerns about future efforts. Part of the legislation has been influenced by those dialogues. It does include a transition plan with an 18-month run-up to the phase-out of FORA. There's also been some very constructive dialogue between FORA and the Sierra Club on a reduction of the fee payment that I think you're going to be discussing for the filing of appeals, and I think that's been a very important and constructive dialogue that I know you'll be addressing today. The process that AB 1614 faces, I mentioned the hearing this coming week in the Senate. If it clears the Senate Governance Committee, it would go then to the floor of the Senate. If there are any amendments taken on the Senate side, it will come back to the Assembly on concurrence. In our legislative calendar, any bill that's currently in the process in either house has to clear both houses by August 31st to make it to the governor's desk and be a candidate for signature. So we have a ways to go. There's been, as you all know, a lot of community input on the FORA extension, and I think it's been, while sometimes contentious, I think it's been a healthy process, and it has informed how I've moved forward and will continue to move forward in the legislature. The other bill that we're moving through it's the third bill since I've been elected on the Veterans Cemetery, and I'm in my fourth year now in the Assembly, and this is our third bill trying to facilitate the implementation of the Veterans Cemetery project. And the bill this year that has also cleared the Assembly with bipartisan support and virtually unanimous support, no opposition, is a bill that focuses in on the funding mechanism that, as many of you know, this would be the second state veterans cemetery. It becomes eligible for federal support and federal funding, but the burden is on us to clear the hurdles of drawing, design, and funding of an endowment fund that the state oversees, because it's a state veterans cemetery. But that fund, that endowment fund, is eligible for reimbursement once we achieve the planning and development targets that make us eligible then for federal reimbursement. So this legislation, which we've received the support of the administration through the Finance Department, and is now also on the Senate side, but there's no hearings set. Actually, I think Veterans Committee and Senate, they may hear it. It may go to consent calendar. I don't have that date with me. I don't know if it's been set. But the mechanism in AB 1842 would allow for an arrangement for anyone who might help us hit that target of $1.5 million in the endowment fund. When the federal money comes to reimburse that, those that have combined to raise the support could be eligible under this legislation to be reimbursed. The tightrope here is that it is not a loan. The state will not encumber state funds given our current financial crisis. And so we've been very careful to articulate this legislation. The state is not offering to loan or repay. That would happen through other arrangements once we become eligible for the federal reimbursement. And so having crafted that rather narrow refinement to the cemetery project, it does give us more options as to how we both raise money toward that endowment fund and hopefully expedite the implementation of the Veterans Cemetery program that's been a work in progress for over 15 years. And as many of you know, the veterans community has been incredibly active in trying to push this forward. And we've tried to protect veterans from having to make return visits to Sacramento, but they've been very diligent and allegiant to fulfilling the dream of establishing the Veterans Cemetery. So they've come every time there's been a hearing in Sacramento. So that, similar to the FORA extension, is now on the Senate side. It will be scheduled for Veterans Affairs on the Senate side, and we expect that one will continue to receive broad bipartisan support. So those are the two pieces of legislation that immediately have impacts or effects in terms of forward reuse. Let me just take a couple of more minutes to give kind of the short version of where we are in the ongoing budget challenge that we face. We have 10 days to, actually less than that, we have till next Friday to deliver a balanced budget to the governor. And based on the May revise, revenues to the state fell about $8 billion short of what was projected in January, and has necessitated budget hearings that have looked at further cuts to education, higher education, disability services, health and human services. There is no entity or program in the state of California that is being spared the challenge of further cuts. Our Constitution in California requires a budget each year that is balanced to be signed into law. We can't carry debt. We can't carry obligations. We can't carry a budget forward with deficit. Our problem is, since 2008, the state had a budget of $120 billion to support a population of just under 38 million. We rank about 32nd among the 50 states in what our per capita public spending is. Since 2008, our revenues have dropped over 30%, a direct result of the collapse of the financial industry, the ensuing loss of jobs, home foreclosures. In the district I represent alone, we've had over 3,000 home foreclosures in Monterey, Santa Cruz, and Santa Clara counties. And so building back from that has been slow and arduous, and our budget, the one presented by the governor in January, dropped from that $120 billion in 2008 to $85.9 billion, and now we have to cut under that by probably another $4 to $5 billion just before next Friday. Part of the governor's May revise and how we work ourselves out of this deficit, we've addressed 70% of the ongoing structural deficit. In other words, that won't recur if we can get the governor's budget passed. But his builds in a revenue mechanism that will go to voters in November and would put a higher tax increase on the wealthiest Californians and an across-the-board quarter-cent sales tax increase. As you recall, a half-cent sales tax sunsetted last year, and the loss of the vehicle license fee has cost our state $5 to $7 billion a year in lost revenue over the last 6 budget cycles. $30 billion not going to schools, not going to higher education, not going to local communities. So every one of you here representing a local community has suffered these impacts, not the least of which has been the governor's reallocation of RDA resources to education and public safety. So there have been no good choices, bad and worse. If the November measure fails, there are trigger cuts built into this budget that we are negotiating right now that would cut another $5 billion to K through 12, $200 million to disability services, another $200 million to higher education. The list goes on. And these cuts are proposed on top of cuts that have been made in the last 3 budget cycles. So we're starting at rock bottom. We're starting at programs that have been cut to the bone marrow. And if we don't build support, and I would argue strongly today for bipartisan support, community support, city support, it will be our local communities that are the first to suffer if we're not successful with the November initiative. Now, nobody likes taxes. The question is, what's the alternative? We have an obligation to maintain minimal services in our communities, public safety. Part of the November provides a constitutional protection for the realignment funding for our local police forces, probation, and the responsibility that they've assumed with realignment of people not going to state prison but being handled in county facilities. So it's all connected. That will be the continued work between now and November. Our immediate challenge, as I mentioned, is by next Friday, getting majority votes in both houses to move a balanced budget to the governor for his review. So that's what we're in the midst of. And again, I just want to thank the local government representatives who are here for the management of budgets that have been so severely impacted by our ongoing state budget crisis. I would just conclude by saying I don't see the November tax measure as a solution. It is a fix only, and the solution, I think, needs to be part of public discussion and public conversation from here on out. What kind of state do we want to live in, and what is an appropriate budget level and allocation to support education, higher education, public safety, etc. Is $85 billion enough for a state that's the 8th largest economy in the world? What is an appropriate level and allocation, and what's an equitable way to raise those revenues? That's the challenge our state faces. And again, I just want to thank the local representatives here for how you've managed in these very tough times. So, sorry to end on that kind of down note. I do think there are solutions. I think the governor has stuck to his word of he's made tough cuts in Sacramento. We continue to work on pension issues in Sacramento. We've continued to absorb cuts in our budgets as legislators, 23% salary cut to legislators. And for those of you who don't know, there's no pension for state legislators. So the contraction has been strong in Sacramento as it has been in the local communities, and it will continue to take place. But let me stop there, and again, thank you for the opportunity, and see if there's any questions.
So thank you, Bill. Are there questions of the Assembly member by board members? Anybody else in the public? All right, Bill, Michael.
Assemblymember Monning, I know that you had the Senate committees had asked for copies of the letters that had come from just about every jurisdiction on the table regarding next week, and I know that there were some other letters that have also come in, but I think the word has gone out to make sure that if you've got a moment to contribute, that this is the time to contribute on the issues both on 1842 and 1614.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Michael. There is a window between now and next Wednesday on the FORA extension and on the Veterans Cemetery for letters in support, qualified letters, letters in opposition. We're getting all of those. They all become part of the packet of the committee members and their staff. And many of you have filed letters in the past, but it never hurts to refresh those letters as we come in on a hearing like this. Thanks.
And Bill, thank you for all you've been doing for the FORA world, but also the hard work you do as we look at a very, very drastic fiscal condition for this state, and your advocacy for protection of incredibly important programs for all the citizens of this state. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to personally come today, too. We all greatly appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I will be there personally on Wednesday to testify.
Great. Thank you.
Despite the early hour.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Alec?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sam is probably on an airplane now at some point, probably over Kansas at this point. So apologize if you can't be here. Wanted to raise a couple issues related to the federal issues. I'll start with taking up for something Manning left off on the cemetery. Our work really consists of trying to continue contact with the VA Cemetery Affairs to make sure that they're teed up to fund construction when the state's able to apply. We hopefully were able to, about a year and a half ago, to shorten that application process because Sam, along with some other members, worked to get the burial allowance increased from $300 to $700. That $400 burial increase reduced the amount of money that's required in the state fund from about $3.5 million to about $1.5. So that made the task a little easier, but it's almost like with state budgeting issues, it's chasing the rabbit keeps moving. So, but remain supportive and look forward to a state cemetery in the site that the board designated all those many years ago. So, National Monument, that's really more of a kind of a collective victory lap. It's been a very quick process. I know Eric mentioned the board's involvement going back several years. That's true, and the board's been very, very supportive. It really, as you know, the effort really caught fire beginning of this year, late last year, with a lot of grassroots organizing, and with Secretary of Interior coming here in January. As Sam was leaving with him, rode back with him to the airport, he was sort of, oh yeah, this will happen. I mean, he was convinced at that point. Really, the challenge, aside from just working out some details, was convincing the White House staff that this ought to happen. I mean, they're rightfully so. They're skeptical of any proposal, and that's their job to be skeptical. Really, the only thing I want to share is from what Sam told the story about talking to the President of Air Force One. The piece that really put it over the edge and got the designation at that time really was the connection with Seattle Classic and that economic engine. It was an interesting conversation, as Sam's related to me, is the conversation of, yeah, it's a really big deal. Yeah, there's 50,000 people here this weekend from all over the country. And so I want to sort of single out, I mean, there's lots of players who really had a role to get everything teed up to ready to be hit. But it was that interesting, that component, the mountain biking component, that really put it over the edge and got the designation when we did. So it's just really a thank you for everybody involved, but particularly Frank Yohannan and his folks who working with Seattle Classic. Probably the biggest piece of Fort Ord-related work that we, as far as been involved in the recent past, has been getting a decision from the VA over the joint DoD-VA clinic out of the docks, or out of the blocks, I guess. This past March. As you know, the VA has had on its radar the need to rebuild the existing outpatient clinic here at Fort Ord, and was going through a process of looking at sites. Part of that discussion, going back about 6 or 7 years, involved General Gorley and his efforts locally to advocate for that clinic to be joint so that it would marry both a DoD family clinic for the active duty service members and their families here to that VA facility. That's something that's been done once before in the country in Chicago, sort of as an afterthought. There were two facilities that were close by, and they've combined them. This would have been the first one in the country purposely built that way, and it took a little bit of sort of pushing the two positive ends of the magnet together because the VA didn't know if it wanted to do that. Once it decided it wanted to do that, the Army wasn't so sure it wanted to do that. Once we convinced the Army it wanted to do that, the VA started to wander off. So it was a little bit of that over the last couple of years. We were finally able to get all of those players to agree, and then it came down to selecting a site. There were really two sites that they were looking at, one in Seaside, one in Marina. At the end of the day, the VA, both were good sites. The VA chose the Marina site primarily because it had already gone through the CEQA process and was ready to go from a local and state permitting process. The VA, they are now in the process of finalizing a RFP that would go out to select a developer. This clinic if we were waiting around to get the $100 million to build the clinic, we'd wait for a long time. It just wouldn't happen, particularly now that the days of earmarks have temporarily abated, I think. But VA was using a process where it will, it's very similar to the RCI housing process you're all familiar with that the Army uses. It will basically do a contract with a private development company to guarantee a lease for the hospital, for the clinic facility for 20 years, and that lease commitment then is enough for the developer to go out and raise money to build the building. VA is in the process of putting a RFP together to select a developer. That should go on the street. They tell me, I had this conversation about 2 hours ago, just to confirm on the timeline. They think in the fall with an RFP, selecting a developer probably in the spring of next year. That developer will then have to finish the design process. VA will go out with about 35% design in its RFP. So they think once that design process is complete, there's I think I understand with Marina, there's really no permitting left. There's some design review and building permits, but nothing terribly significant or involved. So we think probably groundbreaking in early to mid 2014. We're not nothing that we can kick yet, but pretty soon we'll be there. One of the things we're looking to do with the clinic is to use it as a venue for Fort Ord history. There's an effort to build a Fort Ord history museum by the Alumni Association, and in some conversations we said, well, this is clinic, and there's going to be lobby space, and there's lots of lobby space, and thinking of the San Francisco airports we had in mind when you walk to the terminal, there's lots of display space. We thought, well, let's turn the clinic into a lot of, use the lobby space and so forth as a museum. So we're working with that, and that'll probably be part of the design specifications. So the developer will have to build that into the final production. So just so you know, the site that was selected is just over, orient myself, just over here in that field next to Best Buy, that open area. So there'll be the new movie theater and then the clinic area there. Finally, one of the things that this will be unique in the United States is and this is something that the VA Secretary Shinseki pushed very, very hard. It's the first one. When we say DoD VA clinic, I think as we initially conceived it and the way Bill Gorley initially described it, you essentially had two clinics occupying the same building, in a sense sharing a party wall. The VA Secretary wants to push that the next step forward and essentially to have a clinic serving VA and DoD military families. So this is sort of first in the nation, the idea being the same doctor might see a VA patient in one appointment and then a military family, a general practitioner might see the, a soldier or a spouse or the VA patient, all in the same space, and really what the separate clinic is a backroom issue about how you bill it and how you manage some of the medical records. But fundamentally, it's designed to be a unified environment. So it's hopefully we work out. It's a first in the nation, so they're trying to exactly decide how that's going to work out. But it should be interesting. Finally, on BRAC issues, beginning of the year with the President's budget request, there was a request to initiate another BRAC round. That request has not been taken up, so Congress has essentially let that request die, for lack of a better word. For a variety of reasons, there are a lot of questions about whether the last BRAC round in 2005 actually saved the amount of money it thought it would. There's just a general resistance to proceed with the BRAC round, so we don't anticipate any new BRAC round, certainly in this fiscal year, or this fiscal cycle, the FY13. So it remains an issue for the future, but not in the immediate future. As far as the last BRAC rounds, the one that we're most concerned about, the President this year requested approximately $350 million for continued cleanup on pre-05 BRAC sites. That would include the 93 and the 95 BRAC rounds. as it left Mr. Farr's committee, we were able to protect that amount and avoid a cut. Last year we were able to increase it, but in today's environment, we felt that getting out without a cut was what defined success. That president's request was a slight increase from the last year, but that $350 million, which will be spent on BRAC cleanup sites around the country, we anticipate Fort Ord would get between $15 and $20 million, and that's for just to distinguish it, that's separate from the ETSCA process that FORA is managing. This is for cleanup of the land that the Army has still retained. It's the old impact area that will eventually go to the BLM and be part of the National Monument. It's the much more seriously contaminated UXO site, and that's basically what the work that Bill does. So that's to keep that work going on. Finally, I'll just close with just sort of in general, as you know, the military community here in Monterey is still very vibrant. Sort of call it Team Monterey, but it's about $1.5 billion of activity between all the various functions. The Presidio still is Colonel Clark still has some buildings that are going up, and new buildings, and anticipates some new barracks buildings. And so that work continues in spite of the tight fiscal environment. Hunter Liggett this next fiscal year is going to get about $58 million for a new barracks complex. There's a little facility down in southern Monterey County called SATCOM, which does all of the a lot of the high security communication, satellite communication. They're basically getting a whole new facility. It dates from 1961, the current facility, so they need to update it. So there's continued activity on the military side. So and that affects the military families that are living here in the military community. A lot of them are connected with those institutions. So I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Alec. Are there any questions, Alec, at this time? All right, Alec, thank you very much. Convey to the Congressman, please, our appreciation for all his hard work, especially parochially, those of us here at FORA, but also for his work for the state and the county in general. We truly appreciate it. All right, Hans, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I want to thank Assemblymember Monning. We've been working very closely along with Canella's office and Alejo's office on the FORA extension bill. We're glad to see that's moving forward. We'll hopefully be able to do a lot for them in the Senate and get that all the way passed so you can have a clearly defined endpoint for this organization. We think it's really necessary. Legislatively, we're not carrying any direct FORA legislation as Assemblymember Monning's office is. Some legislation that would be of interest to quite a few members of this board would be our SB 1306, which has to do with stormwater runoff and permitting and dealing with regional water quality control boards. I see Dennis is looking over at me because he and the city of Salinas have signed on in support of this legislation, which requires basically that regulations promulgated by the water boards relating to stormwater runoff, ag runoff, would be subject to a scientific peer review by a college institution or other scientific institution, saying that their staff isn't the only one who gets to decide what the science is on these rules. These regulations, they had to do this for quite a few other regulations, but for some reason they felt that those two regulations in particular were not, under the letter of the law, they didn't have to do it for those two. We're saying, yes, you do. So we're hopeful that will go through. That got out of the Senate. Likewise, the senator's working on the budget. We have 1 week left until the deadline. So I think the legislature is going to be very busy next week. It sounds from what I've heard that they're not going to get to leave Sacramento until they get a budget. So expect to see some late night TV from our legislators next week, trying to work out a deal. I hear they're close. Bill probably knows a lot more than I do about how close they actually are on the budget. Other than that, the senator's been working. He's on the conference committee for the package, the homeowners mortgage bill package that was proposed by Kamala Harris. They're working on that package of bills to address some foreclosure issues. Those should be coming out of conference committee really soon, from what I'm gathering, either next week or the week after. I don't know what the final package is going to look at. I've heard a lot from both sides on this issue. So it's going to be a very interesting report and see what happens with that in the legislature. Other than that, I know that we really, we're coming towards the end of our time here, so I don't know if we'll get another chance to give a legislative update before FORA, before Senator Blakesley is out of office, but we want to thank you for our time with you. We really enjoyed it, and we hope to be of help for the last few months we're here.
Thank you, Hans. Are there any questions? Well, and if you would please convey to the Senator our appreciation for his tour of duty in the legislature and his hard work on our behest. Much appreciated. Thank you. I don't believe we have anybody from Mr. Alejo's office. Yes, we do. Leticia Perez? Actually, I'm sorry. Millie, you're sitting right there. Oh, I'm sorry. You should, yeah, we definitely want to go State Assembly District. So.
Well, good
Senate
afternoon,
District.
board members. It's a pleasure to be here representing Senator Anthony Canella. And I wanted to say that the work that you are doing to revitalize Fort Ord will have a tremendous impact in the entire region. Senator Canella appreciates the work that you're doing and wants to see it to become an economic driver into Monterey County. I'm going to do a little just update on legislation that he's been working on. Senator Canella introduced a number of bills that would probably be an interest to you guys. One of them is SB 1115. This bill creates an exemption for San Benito County that would allow trucks with 2 trailers under 75 feet to travel to county roads. The CHP issued nearly 39,000 in citations locally for over-length violations to agriculture truckers between 2009 and 2011. The high incidence of the ticketing has caused some truckers to refuse and operate in the county. Unfortunately, if shorter trucks are used, it will become too expensive for truckers to continue shipping from San Benito County, and produce will spoiled. Another bill that he's been working on is SB 1214. This bill would have streamline the CEQA litigation process for any court challenges to projects located in distressed counties. These are defined as counties that have either unemployment rate, poverty rate, or foreclosure rates lower than the statewide average. Each county would have to meet 2 of the 3 criterias. Even though the bill did not pass this year, the Senator is committed to improving the CEQA process and the unnecessary lawsuits. Another bill is SB 1327. This bill creates an internet website where each state agency posts the necessary permits and licenses needed for starting a business. It is designed to help individuals wanting to start a new business to navigate California complex regulatory system by streamlining the application process by creating a one-stop shop website. Right now, the process is overly burdensome and time-consuming. For example, if you wanted to open an auto repair shop in California, you would have to contact 10 different state agencies and departments to apply for the right permits. This new website would save time and money by putting the permits all in one place. Another bill is SB 1357. Senator Canella also has a bill sponsored by the Monterey County District Attorney Dean Filippo. This bill specifies that the criminal grand jury is the appropriate tool for district attorneys to use when attempting to remove a public official from office for willful or corrupt misconduct. Current law is unclear as to whether an accusation should be presented by civil grand jury or criminal grand jury. The DA should not have to worry about their cases being thrown out because of a procedural error or wasting valuable time and money in the wrong court. And it will remedy the problem with this bill, SB 1357. One of the other bills is SB 1563. This bill will give veterans that have a peace officer training in the military an extra 15 preference points when applying for civil services in the peace officer field. It will help transition our veterans back into the civilian life by giving them credit for their military training. All but the CEQA bills have made it through the Senate this year and are awaiting approval by the Assembly before heading to the governor's desk for passage. Senator Canela will be working hard over the coming months to ensure these bills become law. And I just want to end up that Senator Canela evaluates his positions on the bills that come before him, and he will make job creation one of his top priorities. He is also going to focus on reducing the regulatory burdens that make it harder to do business in California. So that's just an update that I have on behalf of the Senator. If you have any questions, more than happy to answer.
Millie, thanks much. Are there any questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you. Thanks for all hard work, too. You guys are busy. Okay, moving on then. Letitia, I believe you're representing Assemblyman Alejo.
The Assembly Member Luis Alejo. I'd like to briefly just discuss some of his legislation that he's currently working on and has worked on previously. Like many of you know, he's very cautious about and finds very important the environmental issues. And some of the legislation that he has introduced, last year he introduced AB 1221. This bill made it possible for rural and disadvantaged communities to be able to seek funding for projects to deliver safe drinking water and allow for responsible wastewater management through the cleanup of just the state refunding fund. This bill was one piece of the one larger legislative package which was called Human Rights to Water in California. As I am sure, as he is, many of you may be aware that there is a lot of communities out there with a lack of water, and including clean water, including just safe water, drinking water. And last year, this bill targeted this issue, and through great efforts, it happened to be chaptered in October of 2011. Another bill that was introduced, which is AB 2174, which is called Best Farming Practices. He introduced it because the Salinas Valley leads the state in nitrate contamination in groundwater. And a nitrate hotspot in California is, like as many of you may know, is Tule Lake Basin. Not surprisingly, both areas are rich in agriculture. And while we must protect our agriculture and industry, we must also protect our agriculture jobs, and we must also be negligent and be cautious of our farming practices. Research has shown that fertilizers used in agriculture can lead to nitrogen contamination in groundwater. AB 2174 is a common sense bill that would use existing funds under the Fertilizer Research and Education Program for implementing projects to assist farmers and ranchers with best practices for fertilizer use. Giving technology assistance to agriculture producers would lead to more efficient application of fertilizers, resulting in cost saving to farmers who would use less fertilizers and thereby reducing groundwater contamination. He's been working very closely with just technology and wants to improve the practices of farming. Another very important bill that he's a co-author with Bill Monning is AB 1614. This is a much needed bill to extend the sunset of FORA for the 10 years. This issue is very important to him, not only because Fort Ord is right next to the Assembly District, but also because his father was stationed here when he served with the U.S. Army. And the foreclosure of the base in 1991 resulted in a tremendous economic effect. And we were fortunate that Monterey CSUMB was campused here, and however, there's still a lot of work to be done here, and a lot of cleanup. And so we need jobs, and FORA is a needed mechanism to be able to accomplish those goals. He sees FORA as an extension, as a critical issue to having a regional economic benefit, not only for those cities close to the base, but for the places like Salinas Valley, Watsonville, Castroville, and many other places in the region. Just to conclude, one of his priorities is to remain improving our community with the help from local level individuals. He continues to advocate for communities and work with colleagues to find solutions. So if you have any questions, we're more than free to have them.
Good, thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you, Letitia. I certainly want to thank the Assemblyman for his collaboration with his colleagues in the Assembly, especially in the Senate, but especially in and around all of these items that Assemblymember Monning alluded to earlier, the strength in numbers, and I appreciate that alliance that you guys have formed. Okay, that concludes our legislative session. I was informed earlier that there are some people who have acknowledged that this meeting could go for an extended period of time, and we're going to take the closed session out of order so that all people that are here can participate in that. So we'll adjourn briefly to the adjoining conference room. Take our seats. The board has returned from closed session. We were in under performance evaluation of the executive director. That evaluation has been continued to be brought back before the board in July, and the executive committee will have further discussions also. Okay, returning then to the items before us. We have no items and announcements and correspondence. Public comment period. It's an opportunity for any member of the public to comment on a FORA-related item that is not on today's agenda. There's a 3-minute limitation on that testimony, and if you would state your name for the record, I would appreciate it. Is there anybody wanting to come forward? There is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Janet Parks, and I'm president of the Central Coast Veterans Cemetery Foundation. And I want to remind you members that yesterday a serviceman from Salinas was buried. He was killed in Afghanistan, and he was buried in the local cemetery in Salinas, the Queen of Heaven Cemetery. And I want you to realize that his family had to buy a burial plot for him to be buried. And they had to pay for the plot to be opened for him to be buried. And he died fighting for his country. And he should have been buried in a cemetery here at Fort Ord. But consequently, we've been fooling around for the past 14 years with rules and regulations about getting that cemetery buried. And so I want you to think deep within your soul, how could this have happened? And we need help, and we want to get the cemetery built. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
Yvonne Stone, Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network. I'm continuing to hear from people in my community about the devastation of not being able to have sustainable jobs and to take care of their families. And I know there are attempts to rectify what has happened, but all the years that's gone into this process have not materialized the recovery for the people who were the most affected by this great transition of Fort Ord. There are businesses that have not been developed by local people and the impacted community. And just as this lady said, our veterans, we have all the great slogans in the world going around the country about how we love our veterans and what we're going to do for them. We put on programs. We do all sort of things, but we're not making those jobs and those wages available. We need to do something about what is happening with the utilities are going up every day. Food, gas, everything is escalating. There is something very uneven about what is happening, and no one is looking at the fact that the pay scale is not going up with everything else, and we expect people to survive. We expect them to beg. We expect them to do those things that no one is really willing to look at, and we know that lots of people are trying, but we need to do better. We need to do better. It's too uneven. There's too many people on the bottom of the ladder. So I would appreciate it if we can really sit down and look at what can happen, not with just a small group of people, but especially with the people who are being impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
Good afternoon. My name is Jan Schreiner, and I am especially pleased about the Fort Ord recently becoming a national monument. Both my father and my stepfather were deployed through Fort Ord, my father to Korea, my stepfather to Germany. I have family who are born in Korea. I have family who are born in Germany. I also had the honor to go to Punahou High School, which is the school of our current president, and I feel really proud, especially proud, to be able to support him in his decision to make this a national monument for deep personal reasons, but also for the possibility to improve the prosperity of our area. Fort Ord was one of the first of 3 Army installations to become desegregated, and I see it as especially powerful that it is a national monument that our first African-American president was able to sign into existence without the support of Congress. He did it on good advice from local people. I can think of no larger game changer for FORA. To have this area suddenly become a national monument was not on anyone's radar 20 years ago. This base reassessment plan is a huge opportunity, huge, to stretch our thinking to support an amazing president. I'd also like to add that I can think of no prouder place for a veteran cemetery to be than on the national monument, on lands that are part of a national monument. Now, I've been told, people have told me, there are rules about how many veteran cemeteries you can have in the same place. I challenge that thinking. I challenge the thinking because this is a big game changer. Over 1 million troops were deployed through Fort Ord. Think about it. We've changed a large rule. We can change smaller rules. We just need to work together and support one another and separate this cemetery from profiteering, from any kind of profit making. It is not appropriate for the honor of our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schreiner. Anybody else wishing to speak today?
Will there be public comment under item number 8?
Under what number?
Number 8 on the reassessment update?
Yes, there will.
Wait till then. Thanks.
Okay. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close the public comment period and move on to the consent calendar. There's 2 items on the consent calendar. One of the minutes from the May 11th meeting of the FORA board, and the other is filing the notice of completion for the General Jim Moore Boulevard Road project. Is there anybody on the board with concerns with these 2 items? Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to these items? You could bring it back to the board for approval.
Move for approval.
Second. Motion and a second. Motion by Edelman, second by Burnett. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, item number 8 is a update on the process in and around the base reassessment plan.
Sure.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Garcia, board members, thank you for this presentation. Allowing me to give this presentation tonight. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the 5 workshops that FORA and its consultants have put on in conjunction, co-hosted by the land use jurisdictions on the base, and also 1 workshop with Sierra Club. Just to go over briefly the format of these workshops, included a presentation by the co-host. FORA staff provided background information presentation, and EMC planning provided presentation on the reassessment process. And then they broke down into small groups for discussion and comment. and comments were written down on large easel boards and then presented to the group as a whole at the end of the workshops. So 5 workshops were conducted, and just to give you a range of attendees, there's a slight difference between sign-in attendees and what was counted by the consultants as physical count of persons in the audience. So on the low end, at the first workshop in the county in Salinas, there was on the sign-in sheets 32 people, and then also the head count was 32. And on the high end, the workshop in Seaside, the sign-in sheet was 87 people, and then the person count was 159 people. So in total, we had 257 sign-ins, and then 403 just physically counting how many people were at the workshops, not counting consultants or staff. And also, we just wanted to let everyone know that we are still encouraging comments on the base use plan reassessment through June 15th to be included in the consultant scoping and summary report. So those comments can be sent in either through the mail or through a comment form, which is on FORA's website. And then also through the email, we have an email address set up. It's plan, @fora.org. And so I just wanted to give that update on the community workshops. And then also within the staff report for this month, there was some discussion follow-up from the last board meeting on some concerns about the scope of work of the consultant, particularly the language in the consultant's scope of work that described mapping and graphics items related to the developed areas, disturbed areas, undisturbed areas. So the consultant heard those comments at the last meeting, updated their mapping accordingly. So they're just showing munition areas in the baseline map conditions, and that is attachment B in the staff report. And then just to give the board an idea of what's to come, the board discussed previously about including additional public outreach, in particular a chance for the public to comment on the summary report and also the reassessment report at a future date. So that we anticipate bringing that in the supplemental scope of work for the consultant in the next board meeting, the July board meeting. And also want to note, further along in the agenda tonight, on item 9D, the preliminary budget, there is a line item for expenses related to the base use plan reassessment in the next fiscal year. That there's a $325,000 line item in the services contract area of the budget, and it's noted there that it's for public participation engagement increase. So it would be allocatable to the reassessment project, and then any work after the reassessment's completed. I'll take any questions.
Kara, are there any questions by board members of Jonathan at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'll open it up to the public for comment. Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak on this item?
Levon Stone again, Fort Ord Environmental Justice. What I'm hoping to get out of all of the meetings and talking to the public is what are the crucial points of concern from the public? What can the results and the outcome be? Not just commenting, because you can comment all day and all night, as we've been doing for years, and not see results. So I hope that this process is going to lend some action points to the purpose of having the meetings. And I hope that I can also receive some documentation of what has happened out of the various meetings in the various different cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others wishing to speak?
Will that happen?
Yvonne, it's public comment, not debate. We'll have staff respond to your questions when public testimony is done.
Ralph Rubio, public member from Seaside. At the risk of being a gadfly on this subject, I'm up here again. I want to remind you of the promises that were made during the base reuse plan, the hundreds of elected officials that crafted that plan and have taken care of it over the last few years. And it seems to me that the promises that were made, many of them have been kept. The environmental concerns have been kept. Those promises are kept. The munitions remediation, that promise has been kept. The only promise that has been kept is the one to the people, and that is for jobs and economic development opportunity. In looking at the reassessment of the base reuse plan, I would venture to say that the only thing that needs to be reassessed is the speed at which this gets accomplished. The base reuse plan did not fail. The economy failed 3 times in the last 12 years, but not the plan. The plan is still valid and should continue on as it is structured. The base reuse plan is a footprint and a blueprint for the local jurisdictions. Fort Ord is no longer. It is Monterey, Seaside, Marina, Delray Oaks, the county. And they should be allowed to fulfill their general plans or not, at their discretion, not the discretion of a wider group. Those jurisdictions have been promised that economic redevelopment, and they should be allowed to fulfill it at their pace. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Are there others wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, Jan Schreiner. I attended 2 of the workshops, Marina and Seaside, and submitted some written comments. But in attending the workshops, I was impressed how much there was not so much about the base reuse plan itself, actually. There was not very much about FORA at all, especially when we got to the Seaside. There were a lot of comments, pro or con, about the Monterey Downs project. So it seemed odd, almost like the process had been circumvented. At one point, I know I made 5 comments, and 2 were written down, and both in a different color ink than anyone else's in my group. And I know my group was heavily stacked with people who favor some kind of horse project and a cemetery. So it was a very strange process, and I don't mean to put it on the consultant. I think that the consultant did everything possible that they could, given the time constraints and the constraints of the way this process has been set up. I think it's problematic of the process and the timing. I don't understand, and perhaps you can answer the question, why was this not done 5 or 10 years ago? Why was the process of reevaluating and reassessing the base reuse plan not done in 2008 as soon as we knew the housing bubble had burst? Why did we wait until deadline and try to accomplish this so-called reassessment in just a few months? And looking at the FORA, I have been trying to understand how the benefits match the cost. $1.9 million in salary and benefits alone. What benefits can we hold up to show for that cost?
Thank you, Jen. Is there anybody else wishing to speak today?
Gail Morton, Fort Ord Rec Users. Just a couple of things I want to echo what has been said and give you some specifics. One is the procedure for the public meetings, is that the public was looking for the possibility to participate in what was provided in the Sierra Club Chapter 8 resolution, which was the authority board shall perform a full reassessment, review, and consideration of the reuse plan and all mandatory elements. Well, first of all, the public is frustrated because no one can find the definitions or have it explained sufficiently with authority given to us on how those are being interpreted, whether a reassessment is as interpreted by your consultants in their publication, or is it something further? But what is a full reassessment? The public hasn't been advised what are the mandatory elements, and in these public meetings, there's no solicitation of input on what are the mandatory elements because they're not even identified. So the full reassessment, nobody has been able to tell us, is that a report card? That's how it's been described at some of these public meetings. Is it we know it's not an update because the FORA slides presented by Mr. Hulamard says a reassessment is not an update. But no one has told us what a reassessment truly is for the public to participate. Next, I want to talk about the procedure and how the public has been frustrated in participating. April 13th, the FORA board, or the FORA, put out a press release saying we're having our kickoff for a reassessment. April 13th, that press release said the kickoff presentation for the public to participate in is at the April 13th FORA board meeting. Press releases on April 13th will be published at the earliest on April 14th in the local publications. The public was precluded from coming to that meeting. Next, the next press release from FORA was April 11th, citing what the public meetings were going to be. The first one was on April 21st, second one on April 22nd, then the 29th, 30th, and June 2nd. 10 days prior, a press release and expecting the press to publicize that is not going to happen. There were no public service announcements. There was no evidence that we can find as the public or heard that it was on the community calendars, on your television stations, radios, means that you would reach the public besides the 3 ads taken in the Herald, which appeared on Sunday, May 13th, Sunday, May 20th, and Sunday, May 27th.
Gail, if you'd summarize, I'd appreciate it. It's 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry. So I want to find out, I want you to understand that there's this perception of excluding the public, the meetings, you have people reporting out of committees in the meetings that are either employees of FORA, such as Stan Cook, FORA ESCA, and it's not personal. We've had reports of people reporting out of the public meetings, the committees, and it's my last comment, by Beth Palmer, who is the attorney for Monterey Downs. So there is an indicia of bias that also follows with EMC being the representative for the city of Seaside
Okay,
to be
Gail.
sure this happens. So those things need to be addressed.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak today?
Hi, my name is Quay Villa. I don't know if you can hear me, but I attended the June 2nd meeting, and I felt it was very rushed, and I think this process needs to be extended, and it needs to be more open to the public for us to address what we're concerned about. For example, I'm very concerned about the Monterey Downs project. I feel that gambling is not a good fit for our county. Las Vegas is known as Sin City, and I don't think we need that here for our youth. I think we need to make sure we help our youth develop great characters and to be moral and upright citizens, and they will help our county in the future. But I'm concerned because I read in the newspaper that possibly one of our supervisors has a connection to the developer of Monterey Downs. And my personal opinion is that Monterey County has been held hostage to special interest groups. And to me, as a citizen, I try to vote for leaders who will truly serve the public interest and not have secret deals or whatever. There more transparency, because as I don't know why Keep Fort Ord Wild has to sue to get documents. It's very important to know how the money's being spent, if they're being spent properly, wisely. But if it's publicly available, if it's available to the public, then people won't wonder, well, is something being hidden from the public? What is it? What's going on? And we have wasted so many millions of dollars in this county on projects like Cal-Am, and no results that are good for the public, and ratepayers aren't being protected. So there are a lot of issues going on, and I feel like FORA has not been transparent as as it should be, and I would hope that our leaders will make sure everybody has access to the financial documents, to invoices, to the way money's being spent, how is it being spent, and if the results, the goals have been met, and in the future also let the public know how the money's going to be spent and what projects, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak today?
Paula Pillow. I also attended 4 out of the 5 workshops, and a couple of things I'd want to echo that other people had said is that there is a lack of clarity as to what we're really trying to do. It's of great concern to many of us. This process started so late. We think it's going to drive the quality of the product in the end that comes out of this, and it causes us a great deal of concern that it was started so late. It's not like it wasn't coming, and this FORA staff and FORA board didn't know it was coming. It seems as though it was just put off until the last minute, and now you have an unusual constraint of needing to do something by January 1, 2013. And this is one of the reasons why there are many of us who question the extension of FORA, because these types of what we consider a lack in your responsibility to do what it is you're supposed to be doing creates a lot of question in our mind about extending an agency that's not really living up to and doing what it needs to do to fulfill its responsibility in an adequate way so that you can really do this reassessment. And again, the comments by Gail Morton are really germane in that the reassessment, I do assessments in my job. An assessment is assessing something. When you're reassessing it, you're not just doing a report card. You're doing something beyond that. And that's not clear what's happening here at all to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close the public comment period. Jonathan, did you want to make any comments to the comments you've heard?
Yes, I heard. I think one question was, how will the comments be addressed in the report? I would rather hold that off for the consultant to address, since they'll be writing the report. If they want to speak on that, they can.
Can you step closer to the mic?
Sorry. Sure. One question was about how the comments will be addressed in the report. And since the consultant will be writing the report, I don't want to speak on their behalf about how those comments will be dealt with in the report. On why hasn't this process started, why didn't it start in 2008, I think was the question. In 2008, there were no triggers for the base reuse plan reassessment. The 3 triggers are allocation of a potable water source in addition to the groundwater on Fort Ord, or the 6,001st housing unit being entitled, or the date January 1st, 2013. So that's the basic response to why it wasn't started in 2008. And then the other questions, one question was what are the mandatory elements of the base reuse plan, and that's in state law. They're listed in state law as the land use element, the traffic element, the conservation element, open space recreation element, and the capital improvement program. I think those were all the questions.
Okay, Mr. Groves, did you want to comment at all? Just briefly.
Briefly. My name is Michael Groves, president of EMC Planning Group. To the question about public comment, we will be taking all the public comments that were received at the 5 workshops, in addition to all of the email comments we're receiving, the comments that are coming through the FORA website, and including them in the scoping document as an appendices so the board can see all of the comments as they were written.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for any discussion. This is an informational item only, so questions or comments?
Dave,
Frank?
Thank you very much. The staff report makes reference to 2 additional community workshops. I have been stressing the need for this. The problem that I have with this is that the community workshops are going to occur at the same time in the board meeting, which 2 reasons is not in the best interest of the public nor the image of FORA, in my opinion. Number 1, they start at 3 o'clock. Number 2, the public has a 3-minute time to speak. And thirdly, there's no indication that these particular meetings are going to take place after the draft reassessment document comes out. It's one thing to attach the comments and the emails to documents, but it's another thing to have an open session so that people can get up to speak. I stress again that there is a need to make this whole process as available to the public as possible. And the public is walking away from this that they've had 5 sessions in approximately about a 10-day period, and now they have to wait several months before they see a document. At that time, they won't have the opportunity that they think is necessary. FORA's image is tough to maintain positively, and this is a golden opportunity to keep it positive, so I stress that we should try to do this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to, and it may be planned, but I think it might be a good idea, maybe in one of those public workshops here at FORA, to really have there be a spotlight on CSUMB, what they've been able to achieve, sort of what their plans are and the timing for the future, so that since they are one of the elements of the base reuse plan and the jobs creation aspect that has actually happened, I think it would be important to understand how that's going and what the future opportunities are there.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, if I could have a motion to receive the report, we could move on.
So moved.
And a second. We have a motion by Edlin, second one by Bachhoffner. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, we'll move on to new business. Preston Park budget is before us. Robert?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. The Fort Authority staff has reviewed the proposed budget for Preston Park Apartments and for fiscal year 2012 and 13, and are recommending approval of the operating budget and with the capital improvement program. There are 2 options outlined in the budget report, and one is to approve the operating budget and capital improvement program, and reflecting a rental increase of 3%, and also it has identified the critical items of the capital improvement program that we're recommending be brought forward this year. That's option A. Option B is to approve the operating budget but defer the rental increase in the capital improvement program to a future owner's decision. And I've just been made aware that we have received comments from the Preston Park Tenants Association. We have not reviewed them, and I will inform the board that we did have a compressed review period this year. Normally, there's several months between our draft statements and the approval recommendation being brought forward. So with that, that concludes my report.
Any other questions of Robert by board members at this time?
Yes, if I may.
Frank?
Thank you. Robert, I'm looking at the staff report on page 4, evidence the letter that was submitted to the executive officer. And if we look at page 4, under expenses, the account, it has salaries, payroll taxes, and payroll burden. Looking at proposed 2013, it appears from my calculations that that comes up to little over $421,000. But when you look at the attachment to it relating to payroll expenses, and that's the last page of the staff report, consolidation and sign-off, that same amount is different. It's $434,000. I'm wondering, do you know what the reason is? Although it may seem like a small amount, it certainly doesn't seem to balance.
Okay. I'm going to ask that the representative from Alliance step to the mic to explain.
Annette Thurman with Alliance Residential. It is the bonuses component, which is not broken out in the summary, but is provided in the detail component of the budget.
And if I may, why is it not broken out for us?
That's a very good question. This is the same format that's been used for some time. I don't know. We certainly can in the future, absolutely.
Okay. If you would please stay. I think probably you have the other person to answer the next question. On page 6 of the same document, down at the bottom of the document, it says total operating expenses, and it comes out to $836,135. But if you look at the consolidated and sign-off page, under the same year, the total operating expenses is $1,282,000. We're talking about $400,000 difference. Do you know the reason for that?
Yeah, it's the operating expenses listed are controllable operating expenses. The remaining expenses are insurance, taxes, audit fees,
Okay.
uncontrollable expenses.
If that's the case, then why is it that comparing page 6 and the top of page 7, that the net operating income in the document, the title of net income, is exactly the same as on the consolidated and sign-off sheet, in spite of the fact that those other two numbers I just referred to are different? Something doesn't seem to balance.
I'm not sure I completely understood what you're referring
Okay,
to,
well,
but certainly
let me-
we can adjust the
It
title.
was probably poorly asked. In fact, it definitely was. If you look at the bottom of page 6, it says net operating, and the word income is up at the top of the next page, but net operating income is $4,166,694. That's the same that's on the consolidation and sign-off sheet. And if you look at the top of page 7, it's $3,985,606. That also is the same as on the consolidation sheet. Since the other two figures I asked a moment ago about are different than what's on the consolidation sheet, how do you come out with the same numbers on page 6 and 7 as you do the consolidation sheet?
It may very well be, and I don't have a calculator on me, but that the expenses referenced in the operating expenses are the expenses listed on the page 4. It's potential. I'd need to look into it in more detail, but I do know that the operating expenses listed on the last page are the controllable and excluding, again, taxes, insurance, et cetera.
Okay, just two more questions, if I may. Looking at the next to the last page of the staff report, it's titled draft, and it says capital improvement plan.
I don't have the staff report on me, but
Oh, okay. It's the sheet, I believe your Alliance prepared it. It's just on the reverse side of the capital improvement plan. It says Preston Park revised physical needs assessment. You don't have that?
are you referring to the budget memo?
If you will look down at the, do you have it now?
Yes.
Great. 2012, 2013, down at the bottom of it, it says reserve fund before expenses of $4 million. Boy, it's tough to be old. $4,687,000 and change. And it shows expenses for that particular year just above it of approximately $4,223,000. With after the expenses are paid, it brings out a balance in the fund of about $463,000. It's my understanding as a city council member from Marina that FORA's policy and the board here's policy has been that the improvements are to be limited to health and safety matters relating to Preston Park in the past. Is it your request that that policy be changed?
It is our request that the items recommended in the 2012-2013 budget be moved forward with, which by and large would be an asset preservation move and improve the quality of the assets for both tenants and ownership needs.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I do have one more. I'm looking at the same document. Down at the bottom it says reserve withholding per year, and I notice as you go by each year all the way up to 2021, it appears after this first 2 years that the amount drops down. Can you explain what the reasoning is for that?
The reserve holdings at that point would be adequate to tend to the anticipated capital needs on the project while keeping a balance to handle any unknown situations that may occur.
So you feel comfortable that the about 580,000 or so of reserve would be sufficient to take care of future capital improvements?
Yes, so the ones that are in.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions at this time? Okay, is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item?
Yes, Paula Pillow, and I represent the Preston and Abram Park Tenant Association. I'd ask that you give me a couple more than the 3 minutes because this is rather lengthy. So I ask for your tolerance on that. First off, I want to comment.
I'll grant you a little bit extra time, but
All right, it's
I'm
not going to be long. I'm
gonna
trying to go
flex
through
the
it. I've
rules.
already passed out a document. I think you've all seen it. First, I want to speak to the process that was already referenced. Normally, we would start meeting, and we were promised to meet at the end of March, beginning of April, to start a series of discussions over this budget. Those didn't happen. Instead, we received a notice on May 25th that was dated May 24th that blew out of people's doors that had a phone number that was inadequate for tenants to reach the rental office to acquire over Memorial Day weekend these documents to review by May 31st. So it was an adequate time. So that's one of the reasons why you're not getting anything from me in this Tenants Association until now. So I'm going to try to quickly go through this. In your package, you have a May 23rd document. Evidently, the management company forwarded to you another document, June 1, that you haven't seen, and they actually corrected a few things that we found that were in error. So I'd reference for you the document that I passed out. First, if you go down to, on page 1, the fourth paragraph under current market conditions, and these are material errors, mathematical and material errors that in our opinion show a level of competence that shouldn't be acceptable to this board and the management and the presentation of this budget, and bring all of it into question. So if you look at that very first sentence, it says, which does not include utilities. That's erroneous. Those apartments that are being referenced there in the city of Marina do include utilities, water, sewer, and garbage, which Preston Park residents on an average pay of about $130 or $140. The fifth paragraph says that, therefore, the budget assumes adjustments in rental rates in order to compensate such costs, but there's no place where there's an example of it in the budget documents that have been presented to you. Next, they show a table that is used in Section 8 calculations that has absolutely no relevancy that we can find, and they admitted this in an Abrams Park presentation, that this is information only, but it has no importance or relevance to you. Next is under market rents, it says the final budget will be revised in March per the approved rent formula. So it seems like the document that they have presented to you, they did not even review to update things like that. The table that shows the rents, there were some previous numbers in there that they're at variance. They've updated them, obviously. But at the end of that, there's a little text that says, with the City of Marina Council approved rent formula in 2010, it's just a hanging phrase there that just has no connection to anything. And again, we think that this shows an attention to detail that you should not find acceptable in a management company. Moreover, when you move into the market rents, some of the incoming rates are lower than the proposed in place, which actually doesn't comport with the policy that you've previously accepted. They did correct the table showing the 2 and 3 bedrooms. Previously, the memo that they submitted to you in the packet showed 2 and 4 bedrooms. But going directly down on page 3 to the expenses, if you look at the variances, there are mathematical errors in that. The first one being that the salaries is 2.8% variance, not 2.7%. There are some small other errors in payroll taxes and payroll burden. If you go to the next page, utilities, it's 3.9, not 3.1. Professional services is 10.2, not 4.1. And there is an error where it mentions capital improvement program on page 5. I believe it's an error. Mid-Peninsula Housing Coalition transferred 2007, not 2010, so I'm not clear where that's coming from. And lastly, if you'll just give me a moment here, to Frank O'Connell's question, the total operating expenses, if you take your total income and you actually do subtract the expense, what should have been as it was titled in here, you do come to that net operating income figure, but that wasn't explained in here. It was mistitled, and it's actually not informing you correctly. The net income, there's still a difference because they didn't show any line item there for depreciation and asset management fee. And finally, it asked for you to approve this before May 31, which is significantly, we're past that. So what we believe is that you should not approve this. It's not the type of document that any governing board should be presented. It wasn't fully reviewed by Alliance staff or perhaps even FORA staff. And so we're asking that you not approve this and that you send it back to them for, at the bottom line, just the least correction. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Are there others wishing to speak?
Denise Turley. Anybody that picked up this one from the table? This is what is called a market survey. And market survey is used, my understanding, from Alliance, and previous experience is that a market survey is used to determine allowable rents. However, in the market survey, as you go through all the comparables, they list what they are actually charging in rent when Alliance lists what they'd like to charge in rent. Hence, people who are paying $1,200 for a two-bedroom here are listed as paying $1,505. So one of my questions is, why does Alliance need to overstate rents by anywhere between 5 and 25% on their units? I don't understand an advantage to that. And Paul, I will hit very briefly on the fact that Preston Park folks pay all of their utilities, and the comparables pay few or none of their utilities, so you cannot compare the per square foot data to each other because it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. I asked for 1 month's rent receipts. My request took almost 6 weeks, 5 or 6 versions of it. I got a whole year rent schedule. I got a rent schedule out clear the following year. At 3 o'clock before a 5:30 meeting, we finally got the data, but it was squished and illegible. I have tried since then to make any sense out of the data. I'm sorry, I cannot. I could list for any given unit on the property maybe 4 or 5 different versions of what people are paying in rent. I have a large question for a property management company that doesn't know what each one of their units pay in rent to the exact dollar. I find that just incomprehensible. Let's see. I would like to know on the expenses that have been touched on. So is my understanding that the 2.7% salary increase, they're just asking for that, and if you guys don't object, they get it? I know I didn't get it, and I know a lot of people. I know what you're thinking. You know what I'm going to say, and already I didn't get, and nor do I know that anybody get a 2.7 salary increase. So I question that. And then there was some conversation in these meetings that didn't show up, surprisingly, in these documents at all about internet, the possibility of Wi-Fi or internet service. And I'm wondering why that didn't make this final draft. Let's see. I'm
About to summarize?
Yes, I'm about to summarize. Yes, exactly. Although it looks like my light's still green.
Well, that's because my incompetent staff here didn't set the clock.
Yeah,
so.
no. Okay, now it's yellow, so now I have to summarize. And do I get extra time for being interrupted? This is how we found the process. This is exactly how we found the process. When we sat down in meetings, rather than having our questions answered, we were treated very offhandedly, almost disrespectfully. Eyes were rolled, faces were made at us, questions weren't answered. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you. Okay, others wishing to speak?
My name is Quavia. I had almost considered renting at Preston Park, and I had some less than positive experiences, and I've also at city council meetings in Marina heard a lot of complaints about Alliance, and I'm concerned about giving a raise when I'm not sure that those allegations have been investigated fully. And Ms. Turley and Ms. Pillow told me after one meeting they were followed home, and so they called the police. So I'm really concerned about the safety of people who try to do what's right and defend what's right. And so I'm concerned about that. I remember coming home from one city council meeting, and somebody came knocking loudly on our door. It was like midnight almost. And I called the police immediately. And so I would hope that our leaders would make sure that our city's safe and that we're protected properly, and our law enforcement also. Also, I'm wondering if the prospective buyer for Preston Park are they the only buyers? I'm not quite sure where the information is, if that's available to the public, and if negotiations can be done in public, because I don't know why it would be in secret session or closed session, because this is a public matter. This is public property. And again, my impression is that we've been shut out. There's contempt, perhaps, for the public in some cases. And that's not acceptable, of course. And I really oppose the increase for the bonuses or salaries. And actually, I feel like you should consider hiring another company to manage the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
Yes. Levon Stone, FORA on Environmental Justice. You know, we talk about this great place that we live in, but then things happen that we don't want to know about. And Preston Park was a place where military families lived, serving our country. And when the base closed down, we got notices put on our door telling us we had to be out within something, I don't know, 2 weeks or something. We had to move over to Schoonover Park with no help, no funds to do it with. And the buildings were all boarded up. Then the buildings were opened back up years later, and we had to beg to live in one of those buildings because they were going to take Schoonover Park for students. And after we moved in and found out that the buildings were not very well kept up or rehabilitated, we lived there from starting in 1977, and the carpet had never been replaced in the building, and nobody cared. The fact is, and then they started raising the rent every year. We were told it would probably be sold to military, to veterans or whatever. That never happened. And it's a shame what happened there, that the property was taken, and every time we wanted to talk to somebody about it, we got a circle. Talk to the city, talk to the Army, talk to FORA. And we had nowhere to take our concerns. And we were very much intimidated. Whenever we talked about the fact that we had to pay $50 a month to Alliance every month when we first got into those apartments, we were told we were paying for new infrastructure on Fort Ord. These are supposed to be poor people, low-income people, people who lost their jobs, people who have worked on the base, military families, veterans. And this is what we had to contend with. And nobody wanted to hear about it, just like they don't want to hear about it right now. Well, I'm sorry. These things did take place and are taking place, and the best thing to do is to address them fairly. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak on this topic? Okay, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to the board for direction. Does staff have any closing comments here?
Yes, I'll ask that Annette come up and address as many of the questions as we can address, but also to look at a more detailed response after having the opportunity to review the handout that was presented at this meeting.
Hello again. Let's see here. So a couple comments. I'm not sure. I guess we'll start with the market survey because that one's pretty easy. The market survey, for everyone's edification, is a measurement of the rents that are available in the market today. So if someone were moving, what would they pay for rent at any given community today, not in-place residents, which would be a different analysis. A quick review of the value of the units in the marketplace. Preston Park, not weighted with utilities, residents are responsible for paying for utilities, is at about $1.17 a square foot. The remaining apartment communities range in rent anywhere from $1.21 to $1.61 per square foot. If I were to put in a $100 allowance for utilities, so raise the rents at Preston Park by another $100 per month, that would bring the average rent per square foot to $1.24, which is still under every single apartment community out in the marketplace except for Abrams Park at that point. So there's, I would say, considerable good value at the community as far as the value of the real estate goes for the residents, for incoming residents. As it relates to the letter itself, I think part of it's clarification, part of there are some corrections on the report. As it relates to the utility costs that are identified, it is something that, again, we use that as a guide when we are assessing the rents that an incoming resident that would pay, because again, many of the other apartment communities are not water, trash, sewer is paid by the community. So it is a means that we use to identify. We did make the adjustments to the rents. We've had some recent move-ins and move-outs, and the note does say that the incoming residents are paying less than what the existing residents. The units, the rents listed under the current rent range are for those that were moving today, but the budget in front of you calls for a 3% increase for incoming rents as well. That's where the adjustments were made, and so the incoming residents won't be paying less than an existing renter at the community. There are some highlights to the numbers being different percentages. I think that some are not accurate. The 2.7 is actually 2.73, so we rounded down instead of 2.8 to 2.73. Some of them are accurate. Some of the rounds are inaccurate as well. Negative 3.9 should actually be a negative 3.7, so we both missed the mark there. Negative 10.2 should actually be a 9.2 versus a 4.1. And then as far as the capital improvement program, this is referencing the as-built plans, not when the actual transition of management occurred, but when the as-built plans were found and when they were transferred over to management for us to use in evaluating the capital improvement necessities at the building. So again, I think combination of both of just explanation, and then there are some corrections that absolutely could be made to the letter.
Thank you. Okay, bring it back to the board for discussion. Jerry?
We had several personnel testifying to budget inaccuracies and possible unprofessional behavior on the part of Preston Park management. I think I'd feel more comfortable if we delayed this for 1 month, had our staff go through, correct the budget so there weren't a lot of inaccuracies on there, and take a look at the allegations that were made and report back next month. Now, I realize if we do that, we, of course, if we decided to go with a 3% raise, we'd lose out on 1 month of 3% raises. But I think making sure the budget is airtight and we have a total investigation as to, so we know what we're actually voting for, we know what the bottom line is. I think I'd feel more comfortable if we did something like that.
Why don't we consider that a motion, and if we had a second, then we could frame the discussion around the motion.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second, moved by Edlin, seconded by O'Connell. Under discussion, anybody wishing to add on to Jerry's observations?
Just very briefly, in my 3+ years as city councilman in Marina, where the budget had come before the council for Abrams as well as Preston, it's consistently been a problem. It just so happens that they have a tenants association that is very small, but obviously very active. And I've gone to numerous meetings, and it just seems when you walk out of one meeting, go to the next one, that something is different, and none of them really gel the way they should. So I think the motion is very, very appropriate, and I hope that the Alliance will take the effort that is necessary to address these concerns because they're always ongoing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. Any other discussion? Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the motion is a good one. I guess I have concerns about the process as well, and you know, the residents also, when there are different improvements that are going on, they like to be involved in the process of deciding on paint colors and that sort of thing. And I wonder if there's something when we come back next month where we can, I don't know, sort of hold the management company to some of these things. These things get suggested, but somehow there's not been a way for us to hold them accountable to following a good process or including the residents.
Michael, did you want to comment?
Sure. Item number, the question is, can we review the capital improvement programs that are proposed as to how there would be an interface with tenants and how we can hold the Alliance accountable for that process? That's what I interpreted.
That's one part, and then the other was apparently there had been a stated commitment to meet with the residents on the budget process on a certain timeline. It sounds like that wasn't met, so that would be another concern about the process.
We will report back on the agreement that you're talking about, if there was one, with respect to the process, and we'll also report back on, if we're looking at our contract with Alliance, how we can enforce that to make sure that there's some tenant involvement. We can report that back next month.
Okay, any other comments? We have a motion and a second. Jason.
Just clarification as a new board member. So this budget does not need to be passed before the beginning of the next fiscal year?
There will be an impact that I think Mayor Edelin mentioned, that there is a delay in both the rent increases and the beginning of the capital improvement program, because those two things are tied in the motion here. So by deferring this, you're deferring both actions. It will have an impact on the budget later because there'll be less income or revenue for the first part of the year. But this particular budget is not required to be approved at this meeting for FORA's budget for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we will revisit that next month. Let's move on to 9B, which is capital improvement program. Stephen?
Okay, we'll move into a brief PowerPoint, and I learned something new tonight, how to operate a meeting timer, so I think hopefully the PowerPoint will also come off swimmingly. As you will remember, we went through a more detailed presentation last month regarding the capital improvement program, and so what we're going to do tonight is just to briefly summarize the highlights and then give board members and the public an opportunity to ask any questions or to make any comments about the process. Moving to the first slide, this in essence is the fiscal year 12-13 dollar amounts for the major mitigations that were originally emanating from the environmental impact report that accompanied the base reuse plan, and within it is included the components of the capital improvement program, and the lion's share going to transportation and transit, listed out at $112 million, a water augmentation program, the CEQA portion of which is some $23 million, and what we call a voluntary water augmentation program that is not related to CEQA mitigations of some $21 million. The habitat management endowment dollars, or at least the dollars that we need to build to in order to achieve the endowment that has been mandated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, of some $33 million. And we have retired the storm drainage obligation that was included in the original mitigations for the base reuse plan and the capital improvement program. Then there are a series of other costs that are sometimes referred to as base-wide obligations, and the most obvious one that people remember is the building removal program, and what remains to be done of that program is $6.2 million in cash, although there are the documents that you received also include a series of credits that go to those who perform the building removal for us, and then they would get a credit to land sale value, and that's reflected in the documents. Moving to the next slide. This is a list of the proposed 2012-13 transportation projects for the coming fiscal year. Most of these projects are essentially the percentage of that project's overall budget as it is measured against the overall amount of money available. And so it would represent an incremental step forward for a number of these projects. And you see them before you. If you want any particular detail on individual projects, we can have Mr. Arnold from our engineering department step up and answer any questions about them. So moving on to the next slide. Just to remind you, we went through this last month, and we also went through it last year. There were a number of amendments and policy changes that were made by this board last year when it adopted the capital improvement program for 11-12. And I'm just going to refresh your memory about them. In the most significant one was that the Community Facilities District fees, the primary way in which we collect the dollars in order to do these capital improvements, those fees were reduced by 27% across the board by this board, which is within its power to do, dropping, just by example, the fee for a new residential unit to $33,700 from somewhere in the $45,000 range. The line items that have traditionally accompanied the capital improvement program relative to contingencies were consolidated. These were the result of recommendations made by your consultant, EPS, and that was discussed and debated at length last year, but the highlights of those adjustments were that there had been a series of transportation-related contingencies for things like sound walls and finding toxic substances underneath the ground and other various things that had come up over the years. And every time something like that was encountered, a new contingency line item had been added to the budget. And the consultant came in and said, you don't really need all those contingencies. They're not all going to happen in the same year. And they took an industry standard and attempted to consolidate those. And so we now are showing 15% of total costs on the transportation line item as a contingency. The board asked to add back additional contingencies for the habitat management endowment. So we were showing you some $32 million in dollars that we need to build up to a $35 million endowment, but the board was convinced that it would be a good idea to add an additional 17.5, now rounded off to $18 million contingency until we actually finish our negotiations with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Fish and Game. It may be that we'll be able to drop that contingency out, or we may have to use it, depending on how those negotiations go. Then other various line items that were consolidated. Yeah, I think the mic, there's something going on with the mic today. So it's at the workshops it was too loud and I was blowing people's heads off, and now it's too quiet. I'm almost sort of like right on top of it. Sorry about that. The other elements too, that the board took action regarding an issue regarding so-called caretaker costs. It's represented here as jurisdictional property maintenance, or the non-habitat costs that have to be dealt with by the jurisdictions when they receive property from FORA, but before they pass the property on to the end user. And there was some concern about making sure that the capital improvement program had within it some ability to at least discuss funding those caretaker costs. And they had been estimated at one point at $12.2 million. What was agreed to was to include that line item last year, but subject to the jurisdictions having to demonstrate that they actually do have those caretaker costs, and so there would be some kind of a process, presumably, that would come out of that. And then the additional water augmentation costs line item had been carried as a contingency, and we've pulled that out, and as I showed you on one of the previous slides, is now just being shown as its own line item. I should probably explain just this issue about eliminate CEQA mitigations from BRP review. That does not mean that we're not doing, appropriate CEQA mitigations for our program, but just that the reassessment and review part of the program does not require a CEQA mitigation line item, and so we just took that out of the contingencies. If the board decides to go forward with some kind of an update after the reassessment is completed, then we would add that kind of a line item back in. And then also to explain, in terms of eliminating tiers 1, 2, and 3 fee reduction assumptions, we're not eliminating the tier 1, 2, and 3 program, which was designed to encourage a job-to-housing balance approach. All we're doing is just recognizing that that program has not been taken advantage of at the assumed level. So we had assumed 1,100 units. We would have to reduce our revenue projections in order to compensate for approximately 1,100 units, and so we took that assumption out of the budget. So that's what we did last year. That is all reflected in the current version for 1213. And what we're requesting today is an action regarding approval of the budget, but obviously we're available to answer any questions and take any direction.
Are there any questions of Stephen by board members at this time?
Yes, if I may.
Frank.
Thank you. Stephen, I'm looking at the staff report relating to Table 2. I'm just trying to clarify, make sure I fully understand. At the executive committee meeting, I inquired as to the fact that the transportation and transit grand total is a little over $5 million, and that the city of Marina has taken the lead in 4 projects, being Crescent Ave, Abrams, 8th Street, and Salinas. I was told at that time that subject invoices being submitted, that the city would be reimbursed from this $5 million. And the question I had was, if the amount that comes in is less than the $5 million, is it distributed percentage-wise?
Well, council member, I was not at that particular executive committee meeting, but my understanding is the process has been that we budget for an expected amount, and if we don't receive the actual amount, then we reduce the reimbursement commensurately. So that's the way I understood it. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. It's just that I have reviewed the reimbursement agreement that is in existence, and I just wanted to confirm that. That's pretty consistent with what was said in the executive committee. If also, just one other question. Table 4 of the report, the staff report, makes reference to community facilities district revenue, and it has under existing replacement residence Preston Park, good old Preston Park, $3.2 million. It's my understanding that Preston Park does not fall under community facilities district. Are you familiar with that?
I'm just trying to catch up to where you are in the
I'm sorry. It's the staff report, Table 4. left-hand column makes reference to existing and residential, replacement residential, and it has Preston Park. And if you go over under 2012-13, it has the amount of $3,265,443 as Community Facilities District revenue. My understanding is that Preston Park does not fall under the title of a Community Facilities District.
That would be, it's not under the Community Facilities District, but there is a developer fee component to their program, and so that reflects the developer fee.
Okay, so the heading of Community Facilities District revenue is somewhat misleading.
Well,
we could just say
we've had to try and
development
explain
fees.
it. Should be like Community Facilities District / developer fee, because there is a Community Facilities District in place, but it does not cover the entire base. There are certain what I call donut holes that had a developer fee overlay placed over it prior to the creation of the CFD, and that is still in effect. So we actually collect the same fee from both sides of the donut hole, as it were. So we sometimes talk about it in the same breath. The board, maybe 7 years ago, I'm not remembering exactly when, took an action to make sure that there was an equalization between those two, in essence, those two districts. So they have the same fee and the same rules.
Okay. And then one last question on the same table 4, but further along in the document, it shows existing replacement residential, and again, Preston Park, and it has a revenue source of $28,450,279. I assume that's what's considered to be the potential net proceeds from a sale that may or may not take place?
That would reflect the land sale revenue. So that's the land sale revenue table, and it does reflect just FORA's share, just given a particular modeling and budgeting for that sale.
And if that sale were not to take place, then we're simply looking at a total of approximately less than $7 million that would be coming in. If I subtract that 28 million plus from the 35 that's on the last page, there's no other sources except the dunes and this one?
Well, what we're showing you is what we have available, so that if the sale were not to take place, then you would have higher lease revenues coming in, so you would do an adjustment there, but you would have to adjust the land sale totals. Most of the land sale proceeds, you'll see this when Michael and Ivana do the actual operating budget part of the meeting, but most of that $28 million would go to paying off the existing loan on the Preston property of about $19 million.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Justin, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, Steve, I was wondering if you might be able to address which out of these projects on the transportation has been designated in its priority structure and how particularly the percentages are allocated, both for this year and future years. That's not really talked about in the actual update of the budget, so I'm just curious if I know that in the past FORA has determined those priorities, so I'm wondering if you could just reiterate for the board.
I don't know if we could put that slide back up on the screen, but the projects that we list are reimbursements for work done by other jurisdictions, and in particular Marina. Here they are. And there's no priority that's been established between those particular reimbursement projects. So as I was saying earlier, what we do is we take their share of the overall budget, and then we make a revenue projection of what we're going to receive, and then we attempt to stay current on the reimbursement so that the cities at least receive some dollars. And we've done it, we haven't actually favored one of the projects over another, but there is also a queuing order, I would call it, of the larger projects, and the board did create such a priority list of projects, and General Jim Moore was at the top of that list. We're currently completing that project, moving from that to the next project on the list. Again, Jim can come up if you want to get into more detail about each of the projects.
I'm sorry, and just to reiterate, so I understand that there's a queuing order of the larger projects, but my question, I'm curious, is that are those taking place above some of the more, in particular, I'm curious in regards to some sort of regional roadways versus local roadways, and is there a distinction involved in regards to the queuing of the process at the expense of one or the other?
There is a protocol that we developed, and it's included in this in the material that you have, that goes into a list of sort of how the board would make its decision as to which projects would be its priority list. And so there's a whole series, like 7 or 8 different ways of looking at it, that, you know, a regional project might be one of them, but it, you know, it usually has to do with, does it mitigate the reuse plan? Can it be done, you know, in full with the amount of dollars that are available? Those kind of things. And you weigh these different weighting factors, you might say. But in the final analysis, the board really has the ability to decide each year just exactly how it wants to approach its priority list. You know, it's really just meant to give you some guidelines about how you might make that decision.
Sure. I've seen that, but thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay, Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we're on the transportation projects, I was curious about the South Boundary Road upgrade. What does that constitute? Because I'm not aware that there's a project out there in the pipeline. So is there a...
I think we can have Jim come up and answer that.
Okay.
The project for the South Boundary realignment and upgrade begins at General Jim Moore Boulevard. There's approximately 900 linear feet of General Jim that has not yet been widened to its full width. The intersection of with South Boundary Road will be moved northward about 200 feet and will extend about 1,200 feet easterly and then rejoin the existing alignment of South Boundary Road and will extend to Rancho Salcedo Road, the connector to Ryan Ranch. Will provide a full lift asphalt surface, curbs, gutters, sidewalks. It'll be a 2-lane road. It will serve the Delray Oaks development parcel and the City of Monterey development parcels along South Boundary Road.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Seems... Yeah, all right. I had another question on page 6, talking about the water augmentation, and then also Appendix C. We seem to be talking about the regional water project as if it's our chosen option. And I guess, you know, my question is that wise, since most of the partners have stepped away and I'm not sure that project is actually happening? And I think that the CalAm proposal that's now going forward doesn't necessarily envision water for Marina, but is focusing on the peninsula.
Well, I'm not sure exactly where in the document you're talking about.
Page 6 of the, what is it called? The Capital Improvement Program, fiscal year 2012-13 through 2021-22.
So I know that the notes reflected the board's previous endorsement of the so-called regional program previously, but from my standpoint, that note should be adjusted. If there's any other notes and there are other kinds of similar, just boilerplate language, it would need to be adjusted, because I think it's very clear that there is no regional project, and that particular way of representing it is not appropriate at this time. So we should just clean that up. And the budget itself, you'll see this also when the water rates come up, is designed to be completely separate from the whole discussion of the desal program, which is not something that we're including here as something that we're budgeting for.
Okay, well, in the plan, the program document, it's talking about the regional plan as if it's in the current.
Yeah, we probably just missed that one.
present
'Cause I know
tense.
I cleaned one note up, but there's other references,
Yeah,
and we'll
it's a
just
chunk
take
on
all that
page-
out.
It's 2 paragraphs on page 6.
Okay, thank you.
And then also Appendix C is all about it, so you might just want to remove that. While we're on water, I'm sure we've been through this, and I just can't quite remember. But on the slides that you presented, the last slide talks about the additional water augmentation cost of $20.8 million coming out of contingency and into expenses. And I wonder, how does that relate to the figures in the second slide where we have the water augmentation that's the CEQA required water and the water augmentation that's voluntary? Is there some?
Well, it's the same one. It doesn't affect the budget in terms of dollar amount. It's just, all it's saying is that instead of showing the so-called voluntary contribution to buying down hookup fees and so on as a contingency, which seemed to be kind of not an appropriate contingency. Last year, we had talked about it a little bit. We decided to just pull it out as a line item in its own, so it can be seen. It's more transparent that way. And then we also present it, because I think it's inappropriate to present it as a CEQA mitigation, because it's not. You know, the actual CEQA mitigation we've been carrying forward for 15 years or so, and we index it appropriately and have been moving forward. So we just show the two together now, and I think it gives you better information that way.
Sure, thanks. So the $20.8 million that you refer to on one slide, is that the line that now reads $21,655,000?
Yeah, it's been indexed to its new number, I guess, but that's supposed to be the one.
Okay, so
Same
that's the same number, even though the numbers don't look the same.
Right.
Okay, good. Then then I had a question about, there's an explanation on page 9 that's talking about the caretaker costs, and in the explanation, in the middle of the first paragraph under H, it says, these obligations, the caretaker costs, are not base reuse plan required CEQA mitigations, but are considered base-wide obligations. I guess to me it sounds like a distinction without a difference, because if you don't have the money to keep up with the property management and caretaker costs and you come out of compliance with the required mitigations, I mean, it seems to me that those two things are related.
Well, it stemmed from a long time ago in FORA world. There was a grave concern about caretaker costs, about this holding of property over a period of time in a sort of a period of uncertainty. And they clearly are not mitigations, because the mitigations came right out of the CEQA analysis that came out of the base reuse plan. And so they were carried for many years as a line item, then they became a contingency, and then we had this whole discussion last year about which contingencies are still valid, which are not, and so we consolidated a lot of them, and we had even preliminarily recommended that we remove that caretaker contingency, and we got some concern, I guess, expressed at the board, saying, no, don't do that because it could be an issue still, and so we put it back in.
I think I get it. The caretaker costs are about properties that are not going into habitat.
Right. Sort of like
They're just being
non-habitat related
Got it.
caretaker costs, like could be
That was
public
what I-
safety, it could be illegal dumping, it could be any number of things that are not habitat related.
Great, thank you. That was the thing I didn't understand. And then one last question. In Appendix B on the Table 4, let's see, 4 of 7. On the page, there's a page that talks about hotel rooms, and talking about, so there are a couple places where hotel rooms come up, but anyway, on page 5 of 7, under hotel rooms, I see 2 listings for UC hotels, and the only reference to a hotel that I found in the base reuse plan was the 150-room hotel, and there's one listed here for a 250-room, and I wondered if there's a way to know about that, what that is.
Possibly Mr. Bison knows better than I do, but the basic approach is that we take these sheets each year, we go to the jurisdictions, and they then present to us what their current plan is for what their program is. So the base reuse plan actually doesn't lay out, say, for instance, an amount of hotel units that can be built, but rather just allows a land use that could or could not be taken advantage of. And so in this particular case, this is what we received from UC. I don't know if you have any additional comment.
Yeah, the 250 room entry, I think has to do with the East Campus of the MBES Center, coming out of a joint plan that the county and UC did many years ago. So that's just been on the books as something that's going to be in the fairly distant future, but it's just there because that was the latest planning effort.
Thank you.
Jane, is that it? Yes. Are there other questions by board members? Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item?
Good afternoon, Jan Schreiner. And before I speak directly to this item, I want to just say I want to recognize those people who were here earlier for their courage to speak up, because I know I brought the concerns of Preston Park and the intimidation factor that we are suffering in our community of Marina to this board before, and was sort of dismissed with bring us some proof. And it's very, very difficult to get the proof. I know I'm working with an excellent police chief in Marina on some of the things that are happening around my own home. Marina is a wonderful community. We have a lot of people with really big hearts, but we also have some very strange efforts to intimidate and stop the democratic process. And those of you who are elected, you know you've been sworn in to protect the Constitution, which means freedom from fear and freedom of speech. So we need to work for those people. We need to work for the people who are being intimidated as the leadership explaining what we're going to do and how we support people who will speak up. The habitat management, the cost is estimated at $35 million. I have not seen a slide or found a page that explains the work product or the projects, the same way that the $4 million set aside for the transportation and transit projects are. I did find a footnote saying look at section Roman numeral 2D. I cannot find it. If someone can find the explanation of the habitat management, section 2D, please let me know what the page number is. Does FORA have any responsibility toward the former sewage treatment plant sitting west of Highway 1, which reeks on a regular basis? I'm very concerned about it, in part because I know with the state parks in in Santa Cruz, where there's a Sea Cliff Beach and a former military concrete ship. Everyone assumed the oil had been drained from the ship when it was sold to state parks for $1. Decades later, we discovered many dead things in that ship, and the oil was still there and leaking. So I have similar concerns for this sewage treatment plant, which reeks west of Highway 1. It's now part of state parks property, and I see FORA has fulfilled obligations regarding stormwater. How about that sewage treatment plant? And thank you. That was the end of my questions.
Thank you, Jane. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Could bring it back to staff for any responses.
The first question had to do about section 2D in the narrative. It's on page 7, and it does have 4 paragraphs that talk about habitat management requirements, and I think that was what Ms. Schreiner was requesting. Second, the sewage treatment plant is the former sewage treatment plant, which has been closed for decades now. There is an overlay and a right for that property to Marina Coast Water District, to which they receive from the United States Army.
I could go into a little more detail on the HCP dollars if you want. The sewage treatment answer is spot on. It's not included in the mitigations that FORA was assigned, and so it belongs to another agency. But the HCP comes out of a regulatory approval process that is controlled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and in conjunction with the California Department of Fish and Game. And so they have gone through a very long and, we have felt, as longtime board members know, a very arduous process for us of kind of moving the goalposts every time we submit a document and so on. But in essence, there's a series of line items that look a lot like another capital improvement program that have things in it like weed abatement and buying tractors and having staff available and so on in order to do the actual habitat management and habitat conservation functions. And it's an Excel spreadsheet, and it adds up to $35 million or so. And the problem is they haven't actually approved it yet. They have it now. We're hoping to get it back by this fall so that we can get it out to the public so you can see the same document and have it out on the street, but they haven't finished reviewing it yet. So that's kind of where that dollar amount comes from. But it is a bit of a moving target. I mean, what if they come back and say to us, oh, sorry, we have more requirements for you, it's going to cost $50 million. Or maybe we're clever and we come up with some good ideas and we knock the price down a little bit. So it's been a little bit of a moving target, which we've been discussing over the years, but that's where that comes from.
Okay, bring it back to the board for any additional discussion or action. Possible motion.
Yeah, I move we approve the fiscal year 2012-13 through 2021-22 capital improvement program.
And would that include the Parker considerations for language modification in reference to the regional water project?
Thank you. In that case, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Unfortunately, I hate to do this, but I have to ask for a motion to continue this meeting since it's obviously past 5:30. And we're not supposed to go past 5:30 without a motion so doing. So does anybody feel like really making that motion? I think we have to. But
So moved.
We need a second.
You mean continue to another day?
I remember I commented at exec that there was too much stuff on this agenda.
Our chair said he would give a double of the overtime pay we get
Yeah.
for this. So
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, let's move on then to 9C. This is an informational item. You want to continue this one?
This is, Chair Potter, members of the board, this is a part of our capital improvement program review having to do with the Phase 2 study. As all of the members here recall, and Steve just outlined for us, we went through a Phase 2 study and a process of looking at our developer fee program and how it relates to our community facilities district. This was as a consequence of a direct challenge from a number of our developer partners on the former Fort Ord and the jurisdictions who also had concerns about the fee program given multiple items in the CIP, the contingencies, along with the changes in the economics in this region. They requested that we do a more intense look at the program, and the Phase 2 part of it was to determine if the reductions that were done before were in fact the appropriate level of reductions, and if all the items should still be in the capital improvement program, along with making some estimates about the changes in the market and how these fees affected individual home prices as those are changing in the market. At the same time, during our Phase 2 study, we all had the welcome news that redevelopment on the former Fort Ord as it pertained to the jurisdictions was going away, further impacting how we dealt with developments and impacting how the jurisdictions could finance and assist projects. So the two of those things together, along with some additional requests by Assemblymember Monning and Assemblymember Alejo to look at this as part of the multiple meetings that we've had with stakeholders about the extension of FORA, brought to light some options for taking an approach that would be more formulaic to how the developer fees are handled, rather than every few years the developers complaining that it's too high, the jurisdictions complaining they don't have enough, but all of those things in putting a formula together we could all sort of live with. So the first attempt at that, FORA staff put together about a month or so ago, and we started circulating that with the jurisdictions, and Authority Council came up with the idea that if we were going to make this something that was an amendment to how we do things in our implementation agreement, it needed to be an amendment to the implementation agreement. So we crafted a draft document, circulated it, and during that process, we discovered that the work that was being done by the county with respect to making final decisions about the distribution of tax revenues, that the county controller agreed with our position, authored by both special counsel and authority counsel, along with several other jurisdictions in the state, that because FORA's obligations are not under Health and Safety Code, that FORA's obligations were a continuing obligation of the jurisdictions, FORA would continue to get tax increment. It used to be called that, it's now just a share of property taxes. The jurisdictions recognized that this revenue source to FORA could also be a revenue source to the jurisdictions, and felt that in this sort of approach of looking at a formulaic approach to the developer fees, there also needed to be a way of amending the implementation agreement to address sort of a distribution of the revenues that would come to FORA. So what you have before you is a draft of a resolution, a draft, I think, of an amendment to the implementation agreement that would look at how we might approach this question and this issue at this time, as all of the jurisdictions are looking at their annual budgets, want to know about resources in the coming year, and the developers are at the precipice of looking at how they might move ahead with some affordable housing projects in the case of the dunes on Monterey Bay, and how those projects can move forward under our fee program. So we brought this forward to the administrative committee that looked at it with great zeal. The administrative committee, in fact, felt that going ahead with something like this made sense. The executive committee felt that before we need to move that far, we need to get more policy direction from the FORA board. And in the last week, we asked our consultants to look at these particular drafts you have in front of you, and David Zender and Jamie Gomes have provided you with a memo to give you additional clarification on the amendment and the resolution. So Chair Potter, members of the board, I know I probably put you to sleep if I didn't mean to, but this is an important subject for our jurisdictions. I know the timing is important. Mayor Pro Tem McConnell mentioned last week the importance of some knowledge about this redistribution of or sharing of the tax revenues, and staff is prepared to move at your direction.
Okay, and again, it's an informational item, so if there are comments, observations by board members, I'll go out to the public first to see if there's any comments there, and we can bring it back for possible discussion. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak?
Good evening. Good evening. My name's Don Hofer. I'm with Shea Homes. I'm a vice president for Shea Homes in Northern California and a member of the Marina Community Partners. I want to thank the board this evening for continuing to look at this issue and address this issue for the development community. It's an incredibly important issue for us, as I know we've continued to represent to you. Scott Hilk usually is our spokesman. He's not here tonight because he's at the graduation for one of his children, so I'm filling in. The development community in general wants to, of course, pay for the impacts on a base-wide basis that we bring to mitigate for those impacts, and we are in support of what's before you this evening, even though it's not clearly an AB 1600 approach to determination of fees, which we would promote and is the standard in California. We nonetheless are in very much support of this tonight because it gives us some certainty. It gives us the ability to know that in the future there is some certainty as to how fees will be determined and how we can make fairly significant financial decisions to move forward with developments. And so we are in support of this tonight, and we would hope that the forward board members that you would find a way to support it also. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to the board for observations. I would just comment that some of these suggestions that are made by Zender and Gomes seem appropriate, having just given them a 5-minute review. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. But other thoughts or observations, Frank?
Just please, Mr. Chair, my thought is the importance is obvious, as stated by the executive officer. I would just want to get this back to the executive committee to get the process going as quickly as possible to address this. Our city, my city, like other cities, are looking at budgets starting July 1, and we would certainly like to have this addressed. If a special meeting could be held or what is necessary, whatever the chair would think would be appropriate.
Okay, we'll take
Thank
a look at that, Frank. Jane?
Thank you. I was a little taken aback by this, I guess because I don't sit on any of the committees that were looking at it. It sort of surprised me because I thought that what Phase 2 referred to was really taking a look at further information to make sure that the right things were on the list and, you know, the amount was correct, and then to have something show up that is like clearly has gone through a lot of work and thought that certainly I didn't know about. I don't know if other board members were aware of it. It's just process-wise, it just feels a bit much. There's a lot in this, and it's getting late. I wonder if there's a way, and I have some questions, but I wonder if there's a way we could just have a presentation on this. I didn't see the connection with the revenue to the jurisdictions. It was just explained to me just before the meeting. You know, I have concerns about the CIP allocations for caretaking and development of habitat parcels being removed. That would have quite an impact on the county and UC. There's some language about fees being used after first applying all available revenues. I just wonder what that might mean. I have concerns about that. I have concerns about what this might mean for funding for the Veterans Cemetery. I have concerns about capping the contribution to the water supply projects. What if that's not enough money? Then what happens? You know, so there's some big questions here that I don't think I need to have people answer at this point, but there needs to be a time to really go
and
into
that was the concern of the executive committee, that it was quite complicated. I think Frank's kind of heading us in the right direction. Maybe we should have an exec meeting to go ahead and get those out. And if you wanted to get some of those questions out in writing and then target where you specifically see issues, I think that'd be a huge help, because I was quite confident that this had the potential of being a very much extended discussion. And, you know, it was Friday night, and I kind of thought, you know, we wouldn't be here till midnight. So, okay, well, I will definitely take that as direction. Is there any other directional concerns? Okay, well, if we could have a motion to receive the report, we can move on.
I'll move.
We have a motion by O'Connell, seconded by Edelin. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That report is received. We'll move on then to the 12-13 preliminary budget for FORA.
Yes, Chair Potter, we do have a brief PowerPoint presentation on this budget. As I move through this presentation, I will note that Chair Camp of the Finance Committee is here and may have a few comments about the budget once I'm done. The preliminary operating budget for the coming year, if you note in your board packet and the summary of it, essentially notes that with a couple of the things were mentioned on other items today, such as the sale of Preston Park, we will have a slightly larger annual operating budget and the summary of that would show about $37 million, $37.1 million in revenues, approximately $27.5 million in expenditures. Our net revenue is about $9.5, and of course, our beginning balance right now is about $5 million. With all of those transactions, we would have an ending balance next year on 6/30/2013 of about $15.1 million. Now, the part of that will be the normal FORA board set aside. The reserve policy requires that we have approximately 6 months of our operating costs in a reserve. If we go to a little bit more detail, if Jen could get a full screen of that, we might be able to see it a little better for the public. That's a little bit better. Just a quick summary. I'm going to go through it. There are a number of changes that will happen in the coming year that we anticipate. First, we will get significantly more in revenue, primarily from what happens with Preston Park, as we heard earlier. There might be some adjustments in that. There's an attachment 3 to the board packet that gives a summary of what we anticipate would happen with the Preston Park sale. That is essentially a model that we're using. The actual sale may be different. We have in the process of reviewing a broker consultant that this board authorized that would assist us in the sale. We continually get offers for the sale. We do not receive them because the process is going to be an open one for all once the broker is in place. That's all authorized by the board. If you note, there are a couple of items here that are going to be different or less in revenue. One is this is the final year of our coordinated effort with CSU for mitigations, and so that number will go down. It's the remaining amount on an agreement we signed 4 years ago. There also will be less in federal grants that we do not anticipate any economic development administration or other roadway grants in the coming year. We also have now paid off the pollution legal liability loan, the one that's been in the newspapers a lot lately. The payment was final, and so therefore there won't be any reimbursements coming from the jurisdiction, so there's actually a little bit of a relief for the jurisdictions in that regard. Although we will still be covered for a few more years, the policy is paid off. So those are just a couple of highlights. With respect to expenditures, we do have a full staffing anticipated. Currently, what's included in the budget is a 2% COLA, but that decision has not been made. I want to repeat, that decision has not been made. The 2% COLA was included in the budget at the direction of the Finance Committee to enable the Executive Committee to make a determination about the COLA, and the Executive Committee could not come to a conclusion, as you'll note in your board report, because even though they attempted to do so. Under our debt service, expenditures would be about $19 million or so. We have a Preston Park loan payoff amount. This amount may change, but it's the most current amount that we had available to us for the payoff when we did the budget. So those are some of the big highlights. If you want more detail, all of the board members did receive a more itemized expenditures list, but this is a summary of where the budget is. So to go to one more page, the next slide, with respect to the salaries and benefits, we do anticipate keeping staffing at the same fiscal year 11-12 level. I will mention that members of the Executive Committee thought that it might be appropriate for us to consider adding at least part-time staff person to address some questions that have been surfacing increasingly in the last weeks about public access, records retention, public information, and so forth. But that is not included in this budget which was approved by the Finance Committee. There was a 2% cost of living adjustment proposed. There are no other employee benefit increases. In fact, the cost of living is not technically a benefit. And salary step increases, which are typically included in the budget. Last year, the board went through a several-month detailed process with the Finance Committee and the Executive Committee on salaries and salary ranges. And in the reports that the board received, the consultant recommended keeping an annual update on salaries to stay roughly consistent, roughly in the middle of all of our comparable jurisdictions, which is where we are today. The COLA would keep us in that level. However, we are not yet in a position to do salary step increases. Those are being deferred to mid-year as we just did all of those updates in January of 2012. So that's the end of the salary and benefits question. And so the requested board action today, not with any particular direction, but to review the proposed budget, decide the 2% COLA issue, and then approve the preliminary FY 12-13 preliminary operating budget.
Bill, did you want to make any comments? Okay. I might just speak to this COLA issue. I actually had to leave the meeting early, and had I been participating, I would have supported the COLA increase, so it would not have tied 2-2. So I'll just lay that out there. Is there anybody in the public wishing to comment on this item?
Jan Schreiner. I wonder if you might speculate somewhat on if Preston Park does not sell and how that would affect the both the loan payoff and the annual budget. Because if I'm interpreting this right, it's a $28 million expected land sale yielding a $15 million reserve at the end of the year. So if you don't get the $28 million land sale, would you then be $13 million beyond current reserves? And also a question about if the land sale happens, but the price is much lower than currently appraised. So is there any sort of FORA board direction on how low of a sale would be acceptable, or is that a subcommittee? How does that work if someone offers you, say, $35 million, cash up front, something like that? How is it decided where to draw the line for the public lands? Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
Good evening, Board. Doug Yount, Interim City Manager, City of Marina. I just had a couple of questions or comments or requests, actually, relative to this in the budget. Obviously, these are tough times. I mean, the City of Marina, we're going through some pretty difficult budget discussions right now, as all jurisdictions are, and we heard earlier from Assemblyman Monning, obviously, relative to the difficulties of the state. I did notice, though, in the budget documents and discussion that the property tax increment, the property tax, was not budgeted as a revenue source for this year, maybe due to the uncertainties of what's happening between the Department of Finance and Auditor Controller's Office relative to all of the redevelopment or former redevelopment items that are now with those successor agencies and those lists of obligated payments. But just to follow up on that, it's clearly it's not a revenue source here. It looks like it's not creating a deficit situation. It looks like all of the programs are being funded. The previous discussion on developer fees and that whole formulaic thing and reserving some of that 10% is a very wise thing to do in order to backfill the significant impact that redevelopment will have to the jurisdictions from the loss of tax increment. And as we know, the jurisdictions do much, if not all, of the heavy lifting relative to the redevelopment of Fort Ord and need those resources for a variety of important purposes. So that's great. The 10% is great, and that's good for the future. But with about $1.5 million coming in now, half generated in Marina, half generated in Seaside for the most part, that $150,000 spread amongst the 5 jurisdictions of 10%, if that were to start this July, or when the next payment is, that's really not enough to be able to continue forward with the redevelopment efforts. I think there needs to be some additional amount out of the property tax that's shown here, that's revenue that's not budgeted, that comes to FORA in the future here, to allow all the 5 jurisdictions on the base to have that have a significant redevelopment programs that have been scaled back because of the loss of redevelopment tax increment, to have some share of that, a portion, and then scale it back over time as the other 10% picks up. So that's just a thought that'd be very helpful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doug. Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
I have a question about the Silk Preston Park. The question about would the FORA board accept a price that is well below market value because the economy is not good? I'd like the public to be involved in this. I don't think it should be in closed session. This is, again, shouldn't be a secret. We don't have as much affordable housing as I think we need to have, and especially for the handicapped or those who are elderly, and I personally know, some people who are very needy. And I had read a comment, an opinion in the paper about how landowners don't want competition from the government, from FORA or the city of Marina, as far as rentals. And so I'm concerned about that issue. But in these meetings, when we make comments, we're not getting responses. So I was wondering, do I ask afterwards, as far as this issue is concerned? Who do I ask? Will there be a public meeting about the land sale, Preston Park? Because I think the public needs to be involved with this. And so who do I talk to?
The staff will respond to public comments after the close of public comment.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, we'll close the public comment period, bring its staff back for any comments or observations.
I'm going to take a stab at this, and I know that Ivana and Jonathan may be able to help me. The first question that I understood was what happens if there isn't a sale of Preston Park. I attempted to address this earlier a little bit, and Steve mentioned it as well. If there is, in fact, a no sale of Preston Park, our budget will be significantly less, and we will get a slightly larger amount in lease revenue. Instead of 880, it would become something more like 1.7 million, and at the end of the year, there will be a significantly lower fund balance. We would also not repay the loan, and we would not repay the Preston Park loan because we wouldn't have the capital to do that. So we would have the expenditure line item would go up with respect to debt service. So what happens is sort of, if you take the land sales out, you bring lease revenue in, and you bring the debt payment back in, the payoff out. So that's roughly how the budget would happen. Now, we thought this question might pop up, and so we have an item here that shows what would happen if there wasn't for everybody can see that one reasonably well, what would happen if we didn't have a sale of Preston Park. We would wind up with a fund balance about $2 million, which is about $900,000 more than what we're supposed to have in our reserve account, plus or minus, assuming the expenditures that we have up above are all approved and the board accepts that. So if the question came up, we had it ready. There it is. However, this is not the policy of the board. What the Executive Committee and Finance Committee are recommending to the board is the policy you adopted some months ago to sell. This goes to the sale price question that both persons asked. The sales price will be determined by the appraisal and a process of bidding. It's a fair price sale at market. There are other options that we explored with the City of Marina, and we've indicated repeatedly, this board has indicated repeatedly, if Marina has an alternative purchase approach that could be done, we would accept that. But we are intending to sell the property at the market, And at the appraised value, there is an appraisal that was recently completed. That appraisal was roughly $61 million in value. That's already been publicly discussed here. And I also mentioned in several other meetings that we have received unsolicited offers at least at that amount. We've also received unsolicited offers at that amount with terms and conditions. Again, all of that needs to be part of a public process, and that answers the question about open meetings. All of the things I'm mentioning here have been discussed at FORA board meetings. They've been in FORA board reports, so these aren't new. But the process itself will also be public because it'll be a public bid, because we have to offer all bidders the same opportunity to bid at the appraised value. So that's the open meeting question. And then the property tax question that was requested about why isn't it included in the budget? The Finance Committee specifically directed us not to include it in the budget because even though our county controller agrees with FORA's special counsel and authority counsel and other jurisdictions in the state, to date we've received no part of that tax dollars, which were intended to be distributed on June 1, and they're not here yet. And today's the 8th. So we're still concerned. And the Finance Committee also noted that the Finance Department of the state of California has been challenging a number of these controller decisions. So the Finance Committee so far has made a wise decision in recommending the board leave the property tax share out, even though we have a strong case and think it's going to happen. That also will affect the developer fee issue, which will affect other parts of the budget that are in here. And I think there was an additional comment more about, it was more of a request for money than it was a question from the city of Marina.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, bring it back to the board for discussion and possible action. Directors, Frank?
Maybe I missed something. I don't think we had a chance to have questions. The board.
Forward. We could
Okay, right
bring
now?
it back.
Good.
I was kind of hoping eventually we'd get to some action.
Okay, real quick. The chart that looks like that, but it's the one just before that, that showed the Preston Park being sold.
Yes.
On that chart, it makes reference to development fees for 12-13 of $6 million and capital project CIPs of $4.5 million. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that seems to be some type of a surplus. Where would that go? I'm looking at this chart here. Okay, 6 million development fees, and down lower it says capital projects 4.5 mil. And my understanding is development fees are to be used for the capital improvement projects, and if that's the case, based on those two numbers, what happens to the excess amount between the development fees coming in and the amount going out for the projects? Or am I lost? Good, thank you.
I think I can answer that. The 3.2 million, I'm just using the numbers from my head, which would be coming from the sale of Preston Park, would be paying or would be allocated like this. 25% of the 3.2 million would go to Habitat Management set aside endowment fund, and the rest of the balance, which is about 2.7 or 2.5 million, would pay off the balance of the Preston Park loan, because the Preston Park loan funded about I believe 8 million of capital improvements from the capital improvement program, which was to be funded by development fees. So that development fee portion from Preston Park would pay off a portion of the Preston Park loan. So why those two numbers don't match, 6 million and 4.7 or 4.5 million, is that 2.5 million would be would be paying for debt service or loan payoff, not for capital improvement program. And it still doesn't match because there is also beginning balance. There will be balance in development fund at the beginning of fiscal year 2013, which would pay for the rest of the CIP program. So those two numbers would barely match if there are other expenses paid by development fees or if there is a beginning balance. That would be zero beginning balance and everything going towards CIP, then they would match.
Okay, what I'll do is watch this video, and because I'm still confused and I don't want to drag out more time, but I have one other question. On that same chart, you're looking at capital projects. It has $4.5 million. But earlier in the session, we had a capital improvement plan that showed, if I recall, $5 million plus, so something along those lines. It was on a table 2. I think it was in 9B. And are they the same? Are we talking about the same numbers as far as the same projects? Because it would appear that there'd be a deficit there.
We are talking about the same numbers and same projects, but you can see there is explanation by the development fees of $6 million that only about 50% of the jurisdictional projections are included in this overall operating budget. This has been the Finance Committee and the Board's policy for the past few years not to include in the operating budget the entire CIP budget because the jurisdictional forecasts have always been higher than the actual collections. So the Finance Committee recommended just include about 50% of the projections.
Thank you, Chair. That educated me somewhat.
Okay, other comments? Felix?
I wanted to speak for a minute to the cost of living increase that's proposed, because I was one of the people that voted against it at Executive Committee. You've all heard me say at various other external agencies that I think it's real important that government salaries are to a degree reflective of the salaries that the constituents that we represent in our communities earn. And here, as with other agencies, I'm not sure that's the case. And while that can't be the legal basis for us making salary determinations and cost of living adjustments and so forth, I think we can do that on the basis of sustainability. And also, there's a couple other rationales to my feeling on this. One is that various communities actually have to, just on the ability to pay, scroll back on their staff salaries. City of Seaside last night adopted a budget which presumes a 12% reduction in staff salaries. Voting for increase in staff salary here, I think, sends a very complicated message to my constituents, for one. And I know that Bruce Delgado, the mayor of Marina, made a similar comment at various other external agencies that he serves on. Obviously, he's not on our board. But Seaside, Marina, various other communities in the region have this problem. So I feel very, very strongly about not increasing salaries with the COLA. This is not happening in private industry. It's scrolling back in many government agencies. And one other thing that I think is important to recognize is that various members of boards like this say, well, we're just going to the median, we're just going to the median. But as we go to the median with salary increases through COLAs and so forth, the reason I mention this is somewhere in here was the language that we want to make sure that the salaries are analogous to what is paid in other agencies. Well, if we do that, then the next time we're members of another agency using the same consideration, it goes up there, then it goes up here again, then it goes up elsewhere. It's a continual creep upwards. And that's where we get into that sustainability problem. So for one, I think that we should vote for this budget without that cost of living adjustment included. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to expound on that further if I haven't explained it clearly enough to everybody.
You did an excellent job. Okay, other comments? Jerry.
I have to respectfully disagree with Mayor Bachhoffner. You make a very good point. And in most government organizations, I would agree they are overpaid compared to the private sector. There's no question about that. But FORA is a special organization. For example, we're not even sure here in a couple of years if we'll even exist. We've got legislation going before the state in the state capitol. We may exist. Hopefully, we will. I think the odds are good that we will. But then again, we may not. The employees here are. It's a special organization. It's a very lean organization. Very few employees. They do an awful lot. The budget. We have the money in the budget to give them a 2% increase, and like I said, if I could cut overall government employees by 20%, I would. But to penalize the employees we have here, where everybody else is continuing to get their COLAs and so forth, I think it would do them a disservice for the hard work that they've done in this organization.
Well said. All right. I would suggest then we have Nancy.
And thank you. In our city, we're giving up COLAs also. So I think that this will not be a good reflection if we would to pass a COLA at this time. And maybe we could look at it at mid-year.
Okay. We have diverse opinions. Why don't we, I would sense then that the motion's not going to be approved on the first go-around the budget, so it would be coming back for a second vote if we were to, let's say, have a motion to approve with the COLA included. Would there be a motion to that effect?
Let's run the flag up the flagpole and see who salutes it. I'll move that we approve the budget for fiscal year 2012-13 with the 2% COLA.
I'm sorry.
Second.
Could you repeat that, please? With?
That's with the COLA.
Okay, we have a motion by Edelin, seconded by Parker. Is there any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Sounds like a 3 to whatever's left of us. I don't know. Can we just get a show of hands, those on the affirmative side of the vote? 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that right? Yeah, 5. So it was 5-3. Okay. So the dissenting would be Selfridge, O'Connell, and Bachhoffner. Okay. Let's move on. We can look forward to that item again next month. We now have the budgets and rates for 12-13 for the Ord Community Water and Wastewater Systems.
Before we have the staff report on this, could I make a comment?
Sure.
I'm concerned at taking up this item, given the lateness of the hour. We've lost a number of board members already. The public typically expects FORA to be operating between about 3 or 3:30 and maybe 5 or 5:30. We're talking about possibly increasing rates borne by ratepayers. I respectfully request that we continue this to a future meeting and agendize it for a more expected time. And that request would extend to all of item E, so the two information presentations, and also the action item.
Well, on the topic of continuance, then, I would look to the representatives of Marina Coast staff who have been here for quite a while, and also I'd put the question of continuance out to the public. I personally don't disagree, but if somebody wants to, and Felix has made a suggestion, I could do. I'd rather hear before we may even vote on the issue of continuance from the board members and Marina Coast and the public as to how they feel on the subject of continuance. So why don't we go to Marina Coast first? Do you have a representative who's prepared to speak?
Yes, Carl Nizel.
I'm sorry, Howard. Why don't you're the policy maker here from the body? What's your feeling on this? Okay. All right. So let's take it out to the public then. Are there members of the public that would like to speak on this topic?
I would.
I'm sorry, Justin.
As a ratepayer, we would appreciate having this delayed so that more full representation. For instance, one of the key representations of ratepayer, the Army is no longer here, and so we would appreciate it if it could be delayed a month for
Okay.
the comment.
Thank you. Paula?
Okay, I agree with that. I think it's a very I appreciate the comments of Mr. Gustafson that it should go through, but there's a lot in this report, and there's many things that we want discussed, and I think it's a late hour. It's tough after this many hours to be cogent and to pay attention, and there are many representatives missing. So I think I would support it being put off.
Okay.
Continued.
Is
Thank
there anybody
you.
else in the public who would like to speak to this?
I attended a Marina City Council meeting, and they talked about raising the rents on the renters there at Preston Park. It was like 11:30 p.m. It was close to midnight. And obviously, very few members of the public were present. And so I do agree it should be done earlier in the day where more people can be here. And please consider postponing this. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else wishing to speak on this item? All right. Felix, you felt like you're... I'm sorry. We'd have to take a look at the calendars. We'd take that under consideration. I'm willing to entertain that, and I can take it to the exec committee and see what they say, Howard. Felix, it felt like you were on the verge of a motion, perhaps a motion to continue, if you're still so inclined.
I am still so inclined. I'm going to move that we continue items, let's see, what is it, 9E sub I, or sub 1, sub 2, and sub 3 to a future meeting. And I would be open to accepting a modification of my motion to include continuance of any other items that other board members might feel might take up an excessive amount of time this evening.
Well, council advises that it needs to be a date certain. The only date we're certain of now is the next FORA board meeting.
Next FORA board meeting.
And we could, can we modify that date subsequently? Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to amend my motion thusly, so to continue to the next regularly scheduled FORA board meeting.
Okay. Or if...
Regularly, that means it will be to July.
Yes, I mean the next regularly scheduled FORA board meeting.
Okay, that's a motion. All right. Is there any
Second.
you have a second from O'Connell, main motion made by Bachhoffner. Is there any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Okay. Now, we do have an informational item, which is the proposed fee structure change. I know that one member of the public has stayed for long hours to have a say on this. It is, again, an informational item only. If the board's inclined, we could take a brief report from staff. The other item, the record retentions policy, is also primarily informational with the simple question of does the board want to even take a look at retention policy. Seems to me the answer to that would be fairly simple and fairly short. So if staff thinks they can get the appeal issue out as it was discussed at the exec committee, that shouldn't take too terribly long, I would think.
Chair Potter, members of the board, on item 9F, this is a master resolution settlement agreement amendment. Chapter 8 of the master resolution is, in essence, the settlement agreement between the Fort Ord Reuse Authority and the Sierra Club. If you make note of the background discussion included in this particular item, we note in there that this item of the appeals fee has been debated for several years now at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, and there have been questions that have been posed by the Sierra Club for approximately 9 months on the actual price of the appeals fee, which is tied in the settlement agreement to the county's appeal fee level. Staff looked at this appeal fee question. We've had repeated discussions with the Sierra Club, and we noted that this is a case where we are now a bit out of compliance with almost every other policy action the FORA board has taken with respect to being generally around the middle of what our colleague jurisdictions, entities charge for items or pay for items. We mentioned the salaries earlier. We talked about other fees. This one is out of line with that. It would require an amendment to our master resolution to adjust. And so we wanted to get that information out to the board for the board to think through. The executive committee has asked staff to bring back a report that would look at what might happen if we tiered the fee so that there was a particular fee based on the kind of appeal. Folks can appeal a development entitlement. If it's a single-family home, maybe that's a much lower. If it's a fairly large project, that might be something different. And so we've started that process. There are a couple of our entities who have a tiered approach. So we're still continuing to work with the Sierra Club on this issue, and we do anticipate that we'll have a more thorough recommendation both to the executive committee and the board next month.
Okay, are there questions of staff at this time? Does any member of the public want to speak? Jane, you kidding me? After I'm being nice to you and you wrote that nasty letter about me? Jeez. All right, okay, thank you. All right, that was informational. If we could have just receipt of that. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, I didn't see it.
Yes, I also have supported a second look at this. I wrote an extensive letter, not to this board, but to the county to look at their also. But I have one question that I'm hoping someone can answer, because it is curious to me that this is proposing an amendment to the master resolution, which is a result of the settlement agreement. And I'm wondering why this board did not consider doing the same and extending out the deadline for this reassessment so that we could have done a more adequate job of that, given ourselves more time. If this could be done for this, why couldn't we have done that for the reassessment of the base reuse plan? Thank you.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, Jan Schreiner, I'd like to support the concept of reducing the appeal fee. Also, I'd like to point out to the board that this kind of intimidation and sort of peer pressure that was just expressed by the chair of the board towards someone who is choosing not to speak, I feel is really inappropriate. And we need to clean up the way that we are doing politics in these days, including the chair rolling his eyes at members of the public when they come to the podium. It is completely inappropriate. People are allowed to have their opinions, and they are allowed to have their letters written the way they want to write the letters. And the chair gets to absorb some of the heat, because that is the pressure of an elected office.
All right, is there anybody else wishing to speak?
As far as appeal fees, definitely it should not be high. I don't even know why there should be an appeal fee. Again, there seems to me, in my opinion, a pattern of shutting out people who are not well off financially, who are not, who are less, who are poor or who are unable to afford it. And so I would definitely support lower fee or no fee at all.
Thank you. So anybody else? Okay, I'll close the public comment and bring it back. Any closing comments by board members? Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be comfortable, going ahead with the average concept. But if we are going to explore a tiered one, I'd just like to get this done fairly soon. I was ready to propose that we just have the average fee come back as a consent item next month, because it's in line with the FORA policy, and then we have it done.
Okay. Could we have a motion to receive the report?
So moved. Second.
In a second. Bill, under comment.
I think I'd like to echo what Supervisor Parker is saying in terms of simplicity. My impression is that these are very rare. To create a more complex structure for rare events may be overkill for the situation, unless there is a fairly clear and compelling reason why it's going to produce a benefit to the public and to good governance.
Okay, great. Jason?
So how rare are they? Or how common are they?
I believe we've only had 2 actual appeals that went forward in a dozen years. We don't typically have an appeal of an entitlement when it's an individual project that's already meeting the zoning and other requirements of a larger legislative land use decision, but we've only had 2. Typically, that's because all major projects are required to come before the board for a hearing where everybody has an opportunity to register their concerns. And the entitlements only pop up as a consequence of that larger project being approved.
In which case, I would echo the comments made of the value of simplicity here.
Okay, great. We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That report is received. And a record retention policy question. Do we want a policy?
Well, and I know that Lena Spillman was fully prepared to do a full report on this item today, but given the late hour, I think I would just like to make a few comments. The question about a records retention policy is a very serious one. We do keep our records at the former Fort Ord. Both all of the agencies do, and the Fort Ord Reuse Authority does that as well. There are several lawsuits that have been actions that have been filed in an individual lawsuit to secure records, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that all of those records get disseminated. It's important that the board, though, have a policy that is consistent with policies of the jurisdictions that are members. And so as a staff level, we both recognize the seriousness of having a records retention policy and the board's direction from the last meeting to bring this forward. So we're prepared in that regard to bring forward a policy next month. If the board wants to instruct with any specificity, we're happy to do that. But we have worked with both council and we've heard from the public many times on this issue. So we're prepared to move ahead and at staff level bring something to the executive committee and to the board.
Okay, unless there's questions, is there anybody in the public wishing to speak this item?
Yeah, I'd like to make one comment because I deal with records retention at the County of Santa Cruz, and obviously there's a lot of codes that apply to different things. But one suggestion I would make that you include in your policy is that, given obviously the proposed extension of FORA, is that even when you destroy your paper records, that you still keep a micrographic or digital record of them until the agency, at least until the agency does reach its sunset.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I actually oppose destruction of documents, public documents. I think with technology the way it is, we can keep them, and it's important. Sometimes if there's future litigation, there's a certain time period, and the law says, well, after a certain time period, then you can't litigate anymore. People need information in a timely manner, and it's good for the public to have information. I don't really see a need. I don't think it's good to destroy public documents with technology being as advanced as it is.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, we'll bring it back to the board for possible action. Direction to staff to proceed with development of an item to bring to the board.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we ask staff to look into developing a records retention policy. I did have well, let's see, why don't we get a second?
Second.
If there is one. Okay, good. Then I just had you mentioned the state's records management guidelines. I'd be curious about what they require for emails, and that as we're looking at our email retention policy, we look at, if it's an exchange of emails about planning a meeting, maybe they don't need to be saved very long, if at all. But if it's a policy discussion or with outside agencies, that it would be they'd be retained for, I don't know, a year or whatever the period of time.
Good suggestion. Okay, we have a motion by Parker, seconded by Bachhoffner. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is direction has been given. Executive office report. Do you have anything that you really, really briefly need to talk about?
Will said. I do have a recommendation. Seeing that all items are information, I do want to make one comment, and that is under Habitat Conservation Plan, there have been a number of folks that have asked for copies of the Habitat Conservation Plan, and they've asked me individually. They haven't sent me a records request or anything like that. but I wanted to make sure that the full public understood that we are preparing this for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Department of Fish and Game review. It's not yet ready for public consumption. As soon as that's the case and the agencies allow us to release it, we will do that.
Okay, any questions of Michael? Any director with an item they'd like to discuss at this time? I didn't think so. Okay, we have reported out a closed session already, so we are adjourned. Thank you all for your patience in staying this long.